Chapter 543. Flower of blood. Waves of violent auras shot up into the sky again. Such a chaotic scene had never appeared in the dark star ocean before. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky, and dark clouds covered thousands of miles. The wind was like a dragon sucking in water, turning into countless tornadoes. In the center of it all was Long Chen. At this moment, the aura around Long Chen's body exploded again. 7th level True Saint Realm, 8th level True Saint Realm, 9th level True Saint Realm, Peak True Saint Realm. Ao Chang Kong and the Qi brothers were stunned. A single pill could raise one's cultivation by 5 levels. This was unheard of. Everyone stared at Long Chen. Even the powerhouses of the ancient clans under Zhao Qi were stunned. Could he step into the virtual immortal realm? Bang! However, at this moment, a loud bang came from Long Chen's body. It was as if a huge dragon was about to break out of his body. The changes in the sky suddenly stopped. A wave of immortal qi swept across thousands of miles with Long Chen as the center, virtual immortal realm. At this moment, Long Chen had entered the virtual immortal realm. At the same time, an old man in the sky above Turtle Village looked at the dark star ocean in shock. After a long while, he said, "This kid has entered the virtual immortal realm. There is such a talented person in this world. I hope he can live past today." As soon as Old Turtle finished speaking, his gaze seemed to pierce through space and looked in several other directions. In the end, he shook his head and said nothing. At the north region, a divine light shot up into the sky and stared at the south region. In the next moment, it tore through space and headed toward the south region. There were a total of 5 such scenes, and their targets were all Long Chen. Long Chen stood in the sky and glanced at the powerhouses of the ancient clans. Everyone felt as if there was a thunderclap in their heads. Except for the 5 people led by Han Qingsha, no one dared to look at Long Chen. Many of the Earth Celestial Realm and Virtual Immortal Realm cultivators could not help but snort. They felt humiliated. Bang! 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 The light screens under Zhao Qi's hands shattered and the array shattered. Blood kept flowing out of Zhao Qi's mouth. He took a deep look at Long Chen, then turned around and disappeared. The various clans of the Heaven Domain looked at Long Chen with killing intent in their eyes. Ao Changkong and the others leaped and appeared by Long Chen's side, and they said in a low voice, "I didn't expect that you would actually be able to refine a saint-grade medicinal pill. Moreover, you've completely disregarded the barrier of cultivation and reached the origin immortal stage. This is for you." After saying that, Ao Changkong beckoned with his right hand and the meteorite appeared before Long Chen. Before Chang Chen could make a move, the long sword in his right hand had already soared into the sky. A beautiful sword spirit appeared, and the meteorite in the starry sky actually disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. Sword spirit. Sword spirit. That's the sword spirit. Blade divine weapon. There is actually a divine weapon here. The experts of the Qingyun realm stared at the unsheathed longsword in Long Chen's hand. There was only greed in their eyes. A longsword that possessed a sword spirit was at least at the divine rank. In the 10 Heavens domain, there were only 1,000 known divine weapons on the divine weapon ranking, and there were less than 100 blade divine weapons. There was not a single blade divine weapon in the top 10. In the 10 Heavens domain, every divine weapon was priceless. It could be said that they were in the hands of the strongest experts. However, they had now discovered a weapon with a sword spirit in this ancient desolate land. How could they not be tempted? With Zhao Qi's departure, the experts of the various heaven domain ancient clans were no longer restrained. The experts of the origin immortal stage and above soared into the sky and surrounded Long Chen in all directions. A turtle in a jar. These 4 words were perhaps the most suitable for the current situation. Outside Long Chen, there were more than 100,000 experts of the heaven domain ancient clans lined up. Long Chen looked at such a formation and sighed in his heart. If it wasn't for his kindness to Zhao Qi, he was afraid that no one would be able to trap 100,000 experts for 5 days. The Heavenly God clan, such a powerful clan, was buried in the long river of history in such a short time. A sage great elixir, a divine weapon with a sword spirit. You are really the most amazing person I have seen in the ancient desolate land. This person is Long Chen? It seems that this person is really extraordinary. Why are you talking so much? Let's kill this person first. The experts of the Origin Immortal stage and even the Earth Immortal stage eyed Long Chen covetously. Even before the higher-ups of the various clans said anything, they moved together and attacked Long Chen. These people obviously wanted to snatch the sword in Long Chen's hand. Long Chen soared into the sky and stood tall in the sky like a king overlooking the world. He looked at the countless experts rushing toward him and took a deep breath. He said, "Let me see how you can settle the desolate land with 3 swords." Buzz! Countless rays of celestial chi pierced through the sky. Long Chen's long sword was finally slowly unsheathed from its scabbard. Sharp! Cold light, bone-piercing chill, and bone-piercing sword light. When the blade of the sword was only half an inch out, the tens of thousands of people in the sky were stunned. Everyone felt a needle on their backs and a chill surged into their hearts. Crack! Crack! Crisp sounds rang out one after another, gradually turning into a boundless sword hum that caused pain in one's ears and eyes. Everyone cried out in horror and trembled uncontrollably. The weapons in their hands were broken into pieces. No, no! This sword is not a divine-grade weapon. What is going on? What kind of weapon is this? Just an inch of the blade is enough to make such a scene. Could it be a divine weapon? This is impossible. How could there be a divine weapon in the desolate land? Everyone's eyes fell on the long sword in Long Chen's hand that was about to be unsheathed. 1 inch. 2 inches. 3 inches. When the long sword was completely unsheathed, Long Chen suddenly spoke. The Saint core power in his body had been completely converted into celestial core power. The long sword did not move. Long Chen looked at the nearly 100,000 people below him. The blood catastrophe of the desolate land after the desolate land had descended flashed through his mind. He seemed to have returned to the battlefield of the firmament divine kingdom in his previous life. His eyes were cold as he muttered, "A perfected immortal technique, sword technique. Slaying immortals with a single sword." The celestial core power in Long Chen's body seemed to have solidified. It turned into a long dragon in his energy center and flowed toward his right hand. Finally, it gathered on the long sword. The sword hummed and the sword radiance shot out. The sword radiance seemed to last forever. The moment the voice fell, the long sword in Long Chen's hand disappeared without a trace. The entire space seemed to have stopped moving. The sword light was extremely fast, faster than everyone's eyes and faster than everyone's movements. Perhaps it was because the sword radiance was so fast that even space had stopped moving. Poof! Bang! Poof! The sound of blood splattering could be heard. A virtual immortal's body was shattered, and the sky was filled with blood. 1 person, 2 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, more and more people died. However, the blood of the first person who died had just started to drip down. The sword radiance was really too fast. However, with every movement of the sword radiance, Long Chen's face turned paler. When he gripped the hilt of his sword again, there was not a single expert from the Sky Realm ancient clan in sight. Only the sky was filled with blood. It was like countless bright red flowers were blooming. It was beautiful. It was extremely beautiful. Chapter 544. One sword death blood splattered for several miles, swaying in the wind as it poured down. The rain of blood was like a tide, turning into a river of blood that dyed the earth red. It was as if someone had overturned a dye vat in a dye house, and the red dye poured onto the yellow earth. However, the pungent smell of blood filled everyone's senses. It was not dye, but the blood of many powerhouses. Among them, the weakest was a half-step saint. There were also powerhouses at the peak of the Origin celestial stage and even the Earth celestial stage. However, at this moment, there was only blood and nothing else. The Chi brothers stood there in a daze. Their faces were pale as they stared at Long Chen. Even Ao Changkong of the Dark Star, the king of the assassin organization, paled in fright at this moment. With one sword, nearly 100,000 Heaven Domain's ancient clansmen turned into a rain of blood. Long Chen's eyes were so calm that it was terrifying. After all, this battle had shaken the 10th heaven, and he would become an eternal legend in the ancient desolate land. Long Chen looked at the long sword in his hand. At this moment, he finally understood why the sword spirit said that 3 swords could determine the fate of the heavenly desolate land. This sword was no longer at the divine level. With just one sword, it had drained nearly 50% of his celestial core power. 5 rays of light streaked across the sky, but they stopped tens of thousands of miles away. The faces of the 5 people were as green as rust, and they stared at Long Chen with murderous intent. All 5 of them were at the peak of the Earth's celestial stage. How could this be? This man killed all of us with just one sword. An old man in the Bright Moon Ancient Clan's costume said in a trembling voice. The 5 of them were the strongest powerhouses from the 10th heaven. They were also from the top 10 families under the heavenly palace in the 10th heaven. He just used a genuine celestial technique, which is far more powerful than a celestial technique. Who is this man? How could such an anomaly appear in the ancient desolate land? Another middle-aged man with a pair of hammers in his hands shouted coldly. His face was as fierce as a tiger's. The 5 people said one after another, but none of them took the lead. Long Chen looked at the 5 people from afar and sneered. These 5 people's cultivations had reached the peak of the Earth's celestial stage, and they were surrounded by rich bloodline power. Since all of you are here, why don't you dare to come forward? Long Chen held his sword and walked forward leisurely. At the same time, the bloodline power of the dead Heaven Domain experts turned into an invisible force that surged into his body. The power of the bloodline gathered in the river, causing his heavenly dragon vein to improve rapidly. As Long Chen walked forward, no one instantly formed a triangular formation, but they retreated step by step. Long Chen sneered as he looked at the 5 of them. The 5 of them were extremely powerful and none of them were weaker than the Qi brothers. In fact, they were even stronger than the Qi brothers. However, they were completely scared out of their wits by Long Chen's sword. The long sword in Long Chen's hand moved slightly, and the 5 of them disappeared into the horizon like birds startled by the twang of a bow. Long Chen turned to Ao Changkong and said, "The battle of Infinite Wasteland will end with this sword." After Long Chen finished speaking, he bowed deeply to Ao Changkong and tore open the space to leave. The Qi brothers and the 3 divine beast fighting souls followed closely behind. Ao Changkong and the elders of the family looked at each other and bowed in the direction where Long Chen had left. Ao Changkong looked at the dark star sea, which was originally as dark as ink, and murmured, "With one sword, he killed 100,000 people. This person can be said to be a hero of the age. In the future, there will be a place for him in the 10 regions." After Long Chen left, he directly contacted the Alchemist Guild and the various clans of the Ancient Desolation Alliance. In less than 5 days, the powerful forces of the Sword Service clan, the various clans of the Alliance, and the Alchemist Guild all came to Long Chen's side. In 5 days, the news that Long Chen had killed 100,000 clans of the Ancient Desolation Alliance with one sword had spread throughout the Ancient Desolation land. One sword, one sword, one sword, the Long family's son, unprecedented. One sword, the wind and clouds, and 100,000 celestial soldiers fell. These 2 short sentences became the words in everyone's mouth. The remaining clans of the Ancient Desolation Alliance became the target of scorn. Long Chen led the people of the various alliances and the hidden force of the Alchemist Guild, and arranged them in front of the various heavenly passages. All of this took a total of 10 days. When Long Chen stood in front of a heavenly passage in the center of the Ancient Desolation Alliance, his eyes were looking at the northern region. The woman in his heart was there, as well as his blood relatives, but he had to leave first. The long sword in Long Chen's hand kept buzzing, as if it was protesting that his 3 sword strikes were too late. Long Chen took the 3 divine beast fighting souls and stepped into the heavenly passage. In order to completely end the war of the Ancient Desolation Alliance, the heavenly passage that the Haoyu clan built with the world-crossing stone had to be destroyed. In order to destroy this passage, they had to step into the 10 regions. In the ancient Desolation Land, in front of every heavenly passage, there were peak experts of various clans. When Longchen stepped into the heavenly passage, they all knelt on one knee. This was because they knew that the catastrophe of the ancient Desolation Land had ended. It was all because of one person and one sword. Bang bang bang. Everyone destroyed all the heavenly passages in the ancient Desolation Land at the same time. Everyone looked at the heavenly passages in front of them in a daze, and their respect for Longchen grew. Just as Longchen had said, as long as he entered the heavenly passage, these passages would no longer be able to open from the heavenly passage. In the heavenly passage, in the center of the Hallyu ancient clan, a huge light gate in the sky had been blasted into a spatial crack, and all the formation runes had disappeared. Under the spatial crack, a man stood with a sword in his hand. This man was Longchen. At this moment, under his feet was the heavenly passage, the Hallyu clan. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Countless figures flew over. In just a few dozen breaths, there were more than a few thousand virtual Immortal Realm experts gathered around, and there were even many Earth Immortal Realm experts. A middle-aged man, who was wearing a 9-moon robe and a white moon crown, stared at Longchen gloomily and said coldly, You are Longchen. How dare you come to my heavenly passage, the Hallyu ancient clan? Before Longchen could speak, the beautiful sword spirit appeared on the sword in his hand. Her voice was extremely cold. Although I promised you 3 swords, if you don't use them, don't blame me for not caring about your life. There are too many experts here. I can't kill all of them. Everyone from the Hallyu clan looked at the old Taoist sword spirit woman in unison, and they were all shocked. Longchen was helpless against the sword spirit. He smiled bitterly and said, I didn't think highly of the previous sword spirit, but now I miss her. However, I like her ability to kill people. Kill as many as you can. After saying that, Longchen looked around. The heavenly passage was a region of its own, and the Hallyu ancient clan was one of the clans under the 10th heavenly palace. There were more than 1 million people in the clan, and there were many experts. However, Longchen's lips curled into a cold smile. Today, these 2 swords were a greeting gift for the ruler of the 10th heavenly palace. Formless sword technique, formless sword slash. Chapter 545. City of Sword Saints. Those below the human sovereign realm would not be killed. This voice sounded like a shocking joke to the higher-ups of the Bright Moon ancient clan. However, when an invisible sword light appeared, covering the sky, everyone felt their souls begin to tremble. The clan leader of the Bright Moon clan from the Heaven region had a drastic change in expression. He was the closest to the sword light, and half of his body had been turned into powder the moment he came into contact with it. 9 crescent moons rose and fell around his body, and his immortal energy was as vast as the sea as he retreated explosively. This is a saint-grade weapon. This person has a saint-grade weapon. As soon as he finished speaking, he spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face paled in shock. Countless people quickly retreated upon hearing this, but they were all crushed into powder. Longchen leaped into the air and followed closely behind the long sword. The entire Bright Moon clan was in an uproar. One by one, the Essence Immortals flew into the fire. Everyone fled in panic. With the Hallyu clan as the center, powerhouses at the earthly immortal realm and above soared into the sky from all directions and stared at this place in shock. Who dares to make a move within the Hallyu clan? What's with that terrifying aura just now? Quick, look at that long sword. This sword actually makes my hair stand on end. This sword is a saint weapon. Sacred weapon? Since when did the sacred weapon ranking have a bladed weapon? Even the top 10 of the divine weapon ranking have never had a bladed weapon. Experts from all directions were as numerous as clouds. Everyone looked at each other from afar. However, no one dared to take a step forward. Countless experts from the Bright Moon ancient clan had died a violent death. No one dared to face the might of the sacred weapon head-on. When the first sword strike ended, countless people from the Bright Moon ancient clan had died. Longchen's expression was still indifferent as the second sword slashed out. Whether it was the Heaven Domain's Hallyu clan or the ancient Desolate Land's Hallyu clan, Longchen did not show any mercy. After the 2 slashes, Long Chen's celestial core power was almost depleted. However, he did not leave immediately. Instead, he turned around and rushed toward the northernmost part of the Hao Yu clan. There was a dungeon here, and it was filled with women. Some of these people were from the Heaven Domain, while others were transported back from the ancient desolate land. When the dungeon was opened, everyone scattered in all directions. There were actually no less than 100,000 people. Long Chen sighed in his heart as he listened to the sounds of terror that came from afar. This sword spirit woman was really too mysterious. With his current strength and the use of a saint weapon, it was simply too inconceivable for him to accomplish such a feat. He could clearly feel that this power came from the sword spirit. Long Chen stood in place and looked at the empty prison. He murmured, "Lord Nether Ghost, you still like women and the so-called ghost Dao items so much." When Long Chen finished speaking, his eyes were filled with boundless killing intent. The Dark Ghost ruler was a ruler of the Heavenly Palace in the 10th heaven. He had the Dark Ghost bloodline, ranked 31st on the bloodline ranking. This person was also one of the people who had been under the control of a transcendent sovereign in his previous life. In his previous life, this man had turned 30% of the women in the firmament godly kingdom into ghosts. Long Chen still vividly remembered the scene of purgatory in the human world. With the long sword in hand, Long Chen leaped into the air and flew away. In just one day, there was no one left in the Bright Moon clan in the heavenly domain. All the clansmen above the human sovereign realm were killed, and the rest fled. No one dared to stay in the Bright Moon ancient clan. This day was destined to be a turbulent day. Under the Heavenly Palace, the Bright Moon ancient clan, one of the 10 great clans, was annihilated with 2 strikes of the divine sword. Long Chen went all the way east. Now, the sword in his hand was incomparably dim. Most importantly, he could not unsheath the sword again. In 5 days, Long Chen did not stop at all. He was extremely fast. It was not until the 10th day that he stopped. Sword Saint City. Long Chen looked at the 4 big words above the huge city gate tower and could not help but smile. This city was only a few dozen miles long and wide. This size was nothing in the 10th heaven. However, Long Chen knew that this city was the safest place for him now. This was because there was an old acquaintance in the city, a sword saint. Sword Saint Lu Taishu. He was also the only sword saint in the 10th heaven. This was because no one in the 10th heaven could defeat him in terms of sword principle. This person claimed to be a sword saint 500 years ago, but no one knew what his cultivation was. Of course, Long Chen knew because Long Chen had defeated him in his previous life. He was also a sovereign realm expert. Sword Saint City had its own rules. Once one walked into the city, one would find that everyone here was carrying a long sword. This was because this was the rule of Sword Saint City. Those who entered the city could only use a sword. They could only carry a sword. They could only compete with swords. After entering the city with a sword, Long Chen heaved a sigh of relief and walked toward the nearest restaurant. He was really tired these days, so he did not have to run away again today. Along the way, he knew that there were 3 groups of people following him closely. Long Chen casually said to a waiter, "Boss, 3 pots of sword mouth wine, 1.5 kilograms of sword beast spine meat, and 2 slices of shark fin." When the waiter heard this, he immediately grinned and said, "Sir, you are very particular about your food. Unlike someone who just entered the city, you must have been here many times, right? Why do you say that?" "I've been a waiter in this little restaurant for 13 years. These things go well with wine, no matter which restaurant you eat them in, they are a perfect match. Quickly serve the wine. I'm afraid I only have half an hour to eat." Long Chen felt extremely relaxed. This saint city gave him a sense of familiarity. However, the waiter guessed wrong. He had never been to this saint city many times. Once in his previous life, and once in this life. Just for a single competition, he had stayed here for 23 years in his previous life. In this life, Long Chen did not want to stay here for long. He knew that one day, his disciple, Jianshi San, would come here. Some people were born for the sword. Jianshur San was such a person. Perhaps he would not need 23 years. Sword wine, this wine was tasteless like water in the mouth. However, the moment it passed through the tongue, it was like a raging fire, instantly turning into a strong wine. This wine was inexhaustible in the Saint City. This was because this was the water left behind by the Sword Mountain of the Saint City. On the Sword Mountain was the Sword Saint, Lu Taishu. Wherever Lu Taishu was, the water was the sword wine, the beasts were the sword beasts, and the fish was the sword fish. Just like the long sword hanging on the waiter's waist, he was also a swordsman. Because this was the Sword Saint City. Tap, tap, tap. While drinking, the sound of footsteps could be heard outside the city. 3 groups of people riding flying scaled horses arrived outside the Saint City. The flying scaled horses were the most commonly used mounts in the Heaven domain. They were covered in blood-red scales and looked like a 4-legged horse. However, they had the head of a ferocious demon beast. Once this mount galloped, its speed was comparable to an ordinary Earth celestial stage elite. Chapter 546. A large sum of money. 3 groups of people, a total of 30 people, 30 pairs of eyes stared at Longchen from afar at the city gate. Longchen seemed to not care about their arrival. Everyone looked up at him from the windowsill of the restaurant. The 3 groups of people did not come from the same clan, but after looking at each other, they walked towards the restaurant where Longchen was. The waiter hurriedly went up to welcome them. His pockmarked face had a little more respect, and he bowed very low. Greetings to the 3 young masters. The seats of honor in the sky room upstairs. The waiter said. The handsome young man at the head of the group waved his hand casually and said, "No need. Just sit on the 2nd floor, by the window." After saying that, without waiting for the waiter to nod, they had already walked up to the 2nd floor. Many people on the 1st floor saw the 3 groups of people and could not help but frown. They lowered their heads and did not say anything. After the 3 groups of people had all gone upstairs, they could not help but discuss in low voices. Aren't they from the Ding clan? Why did they come to the sacred city? Ding Qiu, Qin Zide, Zhao Shan, the 3 of them are the heavenly palace's stars of the younger generation. They should be in their clans preparing for the battle of the 10 blazing suns 3 years later. What are they doing in the holy city? Could it be that they are all here to practice sword arts? After all, in a few days, it will be the day of the Sword Saint's sword dance. Everyone kept guessing, but they did not expect that the 3 groups of people would walk straight to the seat beside Longchen on the 2nd floor. Ding Qiu, Qin Zide, and Zhao Shan sat in front of Longchen in order. Their gazes fell on Longchen's right hand. There was a long sword there. Longchen waved his hand, indicating for the waiter to bring more hot wine. He stared at the 3 and said, "You chased me for so many days, just to sit down and drink?" "I don't drink." "I don't drink either." "We don't drink." The 3 of them spoke one after another. The dozens of people sitting on the 2nd floor all looked at each other, but they could already smell an extremely strong smell of gunpowder. In less than 10 breaths, the entire 2nd floor of the hotel was empty. On the other hand, the 1st floor was packed with people. 3 great celestial palaces' star children arriving at the holy city at the same time was a rare sight. The heavenly palace star sons were the younger generation that had been personally nominated by the domain lord of the 10th heaven. These people were all heaven-defying. Anyone who could become a star of the heavenly palace had to reach the origin celestial stage within 100 years of age. If they didn't reach the earth celestial stage after 150 years of age, they would be stripped of the title of star. Although the 3 of them looked very young, they were probably close to 100 years old. Since they were the heavenly palace's star princes and their cultivations were at the essence immoral realm, they were naturally not young. However, Longchen knew that the strongest experts in the entire 10 directions celestial domain were not the heavenly palace's stars, but the 10 blazing suns. According to the rules of the 10 directions celestial domain, the strongest star child in a domain was the blazing sun. Every blazing sun would be fully nurtured by the domain lord. In fact, even Long Chen had suffered a lot in his previous life for the position of the blazing sun. Since you're not drinking, why are you disturbing my drinking mood? Long Chen's right hand was already on the scabbard. However, just as he was holding the scabbard, the 3-star children had already retreated to the edge of the hotel, distancing themselves from him by 100 meters. Many people looked across the street and were dumbfounded when they saw this scene. They were all guessing Long Chen's background. Just a casual move had caused the 3-star children to be so vigilant. What was going on? Ding Qiu narrowed his eyes. It was as if 2 slender knives were about to fly out from his eyes. This person was very thin, so thin that one couldn't even see his arms. The loose robe covered almost every part of his body, leaving only a skull that was almost made of bones. This kind of skull was really a little scary. Don't pretend to be mysterious. If you still had the battle strength you had a few days ago, you wouldn't have allowed us to follow you. Am I right? Ding Qiu's voice was very thin, like a cicada's wing flying knife. It was so thin that it made people tremble. Long Chen still didn't move, but he had already downed 3 small cups of wine. He said indifferently, "You're right, but why don't you dare to try?" "I'll try then." Ding Qiu seemed to feel a little embarrassed. He snorted coldly, and a broad-bladed longsword was already in his right hand. This sword was really too long and too wide. Compared to Ding Qiu's skinny body, it was really too comical. The longsword moved. Ding Qiu's immortal power condensed and didn't disperse. It actually turned into rays of solid saber light. Saber light, that's right. This longsword cut out saber light. When the saber light appeared, the surrounding air shook. However, the long table wasn't damaged. Even the air didn't have the slightest intention of being torn. However, everyone felt the terror of this sword. Long Chen nodded slightly. As expected of the 10th heaven, this person's casual sword was actually an immortal technique. Moreover, it was filled with the aura of the heaven domain. It looked simple, but it was actually filled with killing intent. However, in fact, what he used was not a sword technique, but a saber technique. However, using a sword to cut out a sword technique, because in the holy city, only swords could be used. The longsword in Long Chen's hand trembled, and it turned into a stream of light and slashed out. Bang! 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 In the next moment, Ding Qiu retreated dozens of steps in shock and slammed into the hard wall. Hiss! Whether it was the people downstairs or the spectators on the 2nd floor, they couldn't help but gasp at this moment. Ding Qiu was actually forced back dozens of steps by a single sword strike. Almost everyone here didn't know Ding Qiu's name. He stepped into the Saint Realm at the age of 40 and became an essence immortal at the age of 90. His saber technique was even more amazing. But now, he was defeated in just one move. Who is this person? Why is he so powerful? When did such a person appear in the 10th Heaven's Death Spirit Hall? He forced Ding Qiu to retreat with a single sword strike. This person's strength must have reached the essence immortal realm. It seems that he is also a star child. This person is smart. This is Sword Saint City, and only swords can be used here. Ding Qiu used a saber with a single sword strike, so his power is greatly reduced. Everyone discussed animatedly, but they were more and more impressed with Long Chen. No matter what, to be able to defeat Ding Qiu with a single sword strike was enough to show how powerful he was. Ding Qiu's face was ashen, and his immortal energy surged one after another, turning into gusts of wind that scattered in all directions. However, he couldn't attack. Because this was Sword Saint City, and only swords could be used here. Clap, clap, clap. At this moment, a handsome man in a blue shirt stood up and clapped his hands, making crisp sounds. He looked at Long Chen with a smile, then looked at the angry Ding Qiu and said with a smile, "I am Qin Zide. Your swordsmanship is truly amazing. However, if you are willing to part with it, my Qin family is willing to pay a high price, any price." Chapter 547. Heart following sword. The Qin family was a large family located in the Dead Spirit Hall of the 10th Heaven. Like the Ding family and the Zhao family, they were second only to the Bright Moon family. In fact, the death of nearly 70% of the powerhouses of the Bright Moon family was an excellent thing for the three families. Under the 10th heavenly palace, there were a total of 10 great palaces that divided the entire heaven. The Bright Moon family was one of them. Now that the Bright Moon family had collapsed overnight, it was an excellent opportunity for the various families to promote themselves. However, at this moment, all the eyes of the three families were on the sword in Long Chen's hand. Because this sword is very likely to be a holy weapon. A holy weapon is enough to shake the entire 10th heaven. In the 10th heaven, there are hundreds of great palaces in the boundless territory, but there are less than 100 holy weapons on the list. Among them, swords are almost extinct. The value of this sword can be seen at a glance. Qin Zide walked in front of Long Chen. There was no immortal power surging around his body. He believed that his price would definitely be able to move Long Chen. He didn't say too much, but it was equivalent to everything the Qin family could take out. Unfortunately, his face soon became gloomy to the point of turning purple. This was because Long Chen was looking at him as if he was looking at an idiot. Everyone present could clearly see the mockery in his eyes. Long Chen said coldly, "If I hand over this sword, I'm afraid I'll be empty-handed." "Besides, your family can't offer the price I want," Qin Zide said coldly. "Your Excellency has a holy sword in your hand. I'm afraid it's difficult for you to move an inch in the 10th heaven. Since you don't want to accept my good intentions, you'd better take care of yourself." After saying that, Qin Zide laughed twice, turned around, and left. Zhao Shan and Ding Qiu glanced at each other, then slowly walked downstairs. Long Chen looked at the back of Qin Zide, and a sneer flashed across the corners of his mouth. This person was much more difficult to deal with than Ding Qiu and Zhao Shan. The words Holy Sword had already put Long Chen on the cusp of the storm. This is the Sword Saint City. Most of the people who enter here are sword cultivators. Not to mention that sword cultivators would drool over the sword in his hand, everyone would covet the holy weapon. As expected. Although the three of them had already gone downstairs, everyone's eyes were still fixed on Long Chen. To be precise, it was the sword in his hand that had yet to be unsheathed. Sacred weapon? What did Zither young master say just now? The sword in this person's hand is a holy weapon. Hiss. Could it be that the news from 2 days ago is true? Is it true that almost all the high-ranking members of the Bright Moon clan of the Death Hall under the Heavenly Palace have died? You're saying that this guy is the one who almost exterminated the Haoyue clan? How is this possible? A sacred sword. If it really is a sacred weapon, then it's possible. Countless voices of discussion rose and fell one after another, almost turning into shouts. The appearance of a saint weapon had caused a huge uproar in the entire Sword Saint City. It was unknown when Long Chen had left the restaurant during the chaos. This was also the reason why he did not bring Jian San and the others with him to the Heaven Domain. He needed to nurture a powerful force, but this was not the time for them to enter the Heaven Domain. In order to end the Battle of Infinite Wasteland, he had to use a holy weapon. And the use of a sacred weapon would inevitably lead to the current situation. After Long Chen left, below the restaurant, Ding Qiu and Zhao Shan looked at Qin Zide with a questioning look in their eyes. Ding Qiu said, "That sword attack just now was not a lie. This person indeed has the cultivation of a star child. We must quickly seize this sword. Yes, our three clans shouldn't fight anymore. Let's seize this sword. This sacred sword is enough to make our three clans a force that can compete with the Heavenly Palace in the 10th heaven." Zhao Shan replied. Qin Zide nodded. A playful smile appeared on the corners of his mouth as he said, "This person entered the Sword Saint City to make us unable to do anything to him. But now, I'm afraid that everyone in this city wants his life." Zhao Shan frowned slightly and said in confusion, "But it's more troublesome for us to seize this sword." Now that the news of this sword being a sacred weapon has spread rapidly, the entire 10th Heaven's 10 temples will participate in the competition, even the people of the Heavenly Palace will appear. We must seize this sword as soon as possible, otherwise, we won't have another chance. Qin Zide didn't seem to care and said lightly, "The Sword Saint has 3 disciples, Do you still remember? Among them, Lu Xian, who is ranked first, will help us seize the sacred weapon. Now we just have to wait and watch the show. Ding Qiu and Zhao Shan looked at each other, not knowing what Qin Zide was planning. On the other side, Long Chen disappeared from the restaurant and directly left the street, arriving at the Sword Mountain. Sword Mountain, this mountain stood behind the city. This mountain was neither high nor low, and there were no peaks or cliffs. There was only a long river that seemed to come from afar, turning into a small stream in the city. This river was called the Sword River. On the Sword Saint Mountain, there is a Sword Saint. The Sword Saint wields his sword, creating a sword river. Long Chen bent down and drank the water. It was sweet, but it didn't taste like wine. In the blink of an eye, the past life and the present life haven't changed. Today, entering the Sword Mountain again, you and I can be considered friends. Long Chen sighed and walked towards the Sword Mountain step by step. Following the river, he walked for more than 10 li. A middle-aged man stood above the turbulent river. The man's hair was white, his eyes were like stars, and his willowy eyebrows were like 2 long swords, giving him a heroic aura. Long Chen paused, and his right hand slowly grasped the hilt of his sword. That person's eyes gradually opened, and a cold glint shot out from them as if it was solid. The man stared at Long Chen and said coldly, "Hand over the sword in your hand." When did the Sword Saint's third disciple, Lu Wuqiu, start plundering? Long Chen said casually. Lu Wuqiu frowned and replied, "I won't kill you today, I only want the sword in your hand." Pa pa pa. Just as Lu Wuqiu finished speaking, Qin Zide and the other 2 walked out of the forest again and stared at Long Chen with a playful expression. Qin Zide smiled and said, "I didn't expect the heart sword Lu Wuqiu to come instead of Lu Xian. You should act soon. Otherwise, I think someone else will come to take the sword soon." Lu Wuqiu stared at Qin Zide and said coldly, "I'll help you take the sword, but if you go back on your words, you'll have to bear the consequences." Qin Zide nodded and said, "Don't worry, leave the matter of your eldest senior brother, Lu Xian, to me." Long Chen looked at them and smiled. He said in a deep voice, "The heart sword Dao follows the heart. I've never had a sword in my life, but today, I've come to take the sword for Lu Xian. However, you can't beat me with your sword technique. I've come to see your master today." Long Chen looked at Lu Wuqiu, who was standing above the turbulent river. He waved the sword in his hand and a ray of sword light fell into the river. In the next moment, he stepped into the river. When they heard Long Chen's words, they were first startled, but then they couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 548. Sword Duel on the River. Long Chen revealed a murderous look at Qin Zide and the other 2. Just as he stepped into the river, the entire river began to boil like boiling water. The boiling water extended all the way to the middle of the mountain range. Everywhere it passed, it was the same. Hiss. Qin Zide and the other 2's eyes narrowed, and they couldn't help but take a few steps back. Lu Wuqiu stared at Long Chen, and his whole body was filled with fighting spirit. He said in a low voice, "Your Excellency's sword cultivation is so high. I've been here for 5 years, but I still can't reach this level." Lu Wuqiu unsheathed his sword, and his whole body soared intense sword. Long Chen nodded slightly. This Lu Wuqiu was also someone who had condensed a sword soul. Lu Wuqiu also stood on the river, and the water beneath his feet rose and fell. His sword pierced through the air, and a wisp of ethereal intent accompanied by vast immoral power swept toward Long Chen. Long Chen didn't unsheath his sword, but he still slashed out without hesitation. The sword was like a rainbow, but Qin Zide and the other 2's movements were extremely slow, and they couldn't see anything strange. However, the water beneath their feet shot up like a fountain, holding them back. Buzz! The tide of the river raised 100 zhang tall wave, and pillars of water rose behind the 2. For a moment, it was as if countless tentacles were dancing wildly. Qin Zide and the other 2 retreated 100 steps again, but even so, countless water droplets still splashed on their bodies. Their faces instantly turned pale, and their faces were filled with horror. Zhao Shan was even worse. He actually spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body was riddled with holes. It was as if 10,000 swords had pierced through his heart. Qin Zide and the other two felt a chill in their hearts. They were all in the late stage of the virtual immortal realm, but now they felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Originally, they thought that Longchen was only relying on the power of his holy weapon to contend with them. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case. His battle with Lu Wuqiu alone was enough to make him one of the heavenly palace's star sons. Ding Qiu felt that his mouth was dry. He secretly thought that he was extremely lucky to be able to fight with Longchen today. He swallowed his saliva and said in a low voice, "This person's sword art is superb, and his fighting power is extremely strong. Can Lu Wuqiu defeat him?" Qin Zide grunted coldly as a wisp of a fierce expression flashed on his face, and he said in a low voice, "Don't worry." Even though this Lu Wuqiu is ranked at the third position beneath the Sword Saints and is only a little over 40 years old, he possesses a cultivation at the earthly immortal realm. If he attacks with his full strength, then this person will absolutely be no match for him. Moreover, if he loses, there's still Lu Xian. Qin Zide seemed very confident. Ding Qiu and Lu Xian naturally relaxed when they heard Lu Xian's name. Lu Xian was the first disciple of the sword sage, Lu Taishu. He had been cultivating in the Sword Mountain for more than 100 years. His sword cultivation was unprecedented. It was rumored that his cultivation had reached the Earth Celestial Stage's later stage. Reaching the late stage of the Earth Immortal Realm within 100 years, even in the 10th heaven, there aren't many people who can do that. I think this person's cultivation is at most at the early stage of the virtual immortal realm. Even if his sword cultivation is good, it's impossible for him to defeat Lu Wuqiu, let alone be compared to Lu Xian. Zhao Shan said in a low voice. Just as the few of them were discussing, one figure after another rushed over from the city. Many people stopped within 1,000 meters of the battle between Longchen and Lu Wuqiu. Look, this person is actually competing with Lu Wuqiu. This person's sword hasn't been unsheathed, but he can fight with Lu Wuqiu. There's no doubt that he's holding a holy weapon. We've already received news that this person used the power of 2 swords to cut the Bright Moon clan into pieces a few days ago. If it's not a holy weapon in his hand, what else can it be? A holy weapon with a blade. If we enter the Sword Mountain, I don't know if we'll have a chance to obtain this sword. Everyone came over, but they felt uneasy in their hearts. As everyone said, this was the city of the Sword Saints. This was the Sword Mountain where the Sword Saints resided. If the Sword Saints wanted to take the sword, who could stop them? Bang! In the blink of an eye, more than 1,000 people had surrounded Longchen and Lu Wuqiu within a radius of 10,000 meters. However, just as the noise gradually rose, the water in the sky poured down in torrents. Lu Wuqiu slowly descended from the sky, but his face was as pale as paper. He stared at Longchen and said in a daze, "If I don't use the power of my cultivation at all, and you and I only compete in sword moves, how many moves would you need to defeat me?" Lu Wuqiu looked at the bloodstain on his right arm, and his mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. When he fought with Longchen, he had only used 50% of his cultivation, and the rest had been sword moves. However, in just 13 moves, he had already been defeated. Longchen stared at Lu Wuqiu, and said indifferently, 3 moves is enough. As his cultivation gradually recovered, Longchen had become more and more proficient in the way of the sword from his previous life. Hua! The surrounding people were shocked, and for a moment, they all looked at each other in dismay. Lu Wuqiu was actually defeated. How is this possible? Lu Wuqiu's master is the Sword Saint Lu Taishu. How could he lose to him? Who is this person? He has a sacred sword, and his cultivation in the way of the sword is superior to Lu Wuqiu's. How could he be a nobody? Although this person won, his words are too arrogant. If he didn't have the sacred sword, could he really defeat Lu Wuqiu? He even said that if they competed in sword moves, 3 moves would be enough. Lu Wuqiu has always been an easygoing person. This time, he must have held back, and this person took advantage of the loophole. Everyone fiercely shook their heads, and discussed animatedly. It was obvious that they didn't want the third disciple of the Sword Saint of Sword Mountain to be defeated like this. However, although their mouths were full of ridicule, no one dared to take a step forward. Not to mention that he had defeated Lu Wuqiu, the sacred sword in his hand was unavoidably terrifying. Sometimes, the more people there were, the more cowardly they would become. Everyone wanted to obtain the sacred sword, but no one was willing to take the risk of being the first to make a move. Long Chen didn't care about the surrounding people, and only stared at Lu Wuqiu, and said, "Your master carved it on Sword Mountain, in the Heavenly Sword Cave?" Lu Wuqiu, who still had some lingering fear of Long Chen's sword moves, suddenly froze when he heard Long Chen's words. The Heavenly Sword Cave was a cave on Sword Mountain that was personally opened by Lu Taishu. Except for the three of them, almost no one knew about it. How could Long Chen know about it? Could it be that he really knew his master? Lu Wuqiu couldn't help but doubt, and then shook his head, thinking that it was impossible. The Sword Saint Lu Taishu hadn't left Sword Mountain for 400 years, and Long Chen probably hadn't even reached 50 years of age. Lu Wuqiu murmured, "Heaven, earth, black, and yellow caves, I also don't know where my master is, but in 2 days, he will come out to practice his sword." As his voice fell, he turned to look at Qin Zide and the other two on the side. Lu Wuqiu's sword-like eyebrows wrinkled, and he said in a low voice, "I can't take this person down, but I definitely won't let you see my senior brother. Get down the mountain quickly, or don't blame my sword for being merciless." Qin Zide took a deep look at Lu Wuqiu, and then glanced at Long Chen. He didn't answer, but turned to leave. However, just as he took 2 steps, he saw Long Chen standing in front of them. Chapter 549. Zhu He. Long Chen directly blocked Qin Zide's group in front of everyone. Lu Wuqiu also frowned slightly. The Qin family, Zhao family, and Ding family were quite famous in the Death Spirit Hall. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were second only to the Haoyu family. Becoming enemies with these 3 families was very unwise. Qin Zide narrowed his eyes. Although he wanted to retreat, he didn't give up on the idea of seizing the sacred sword. If he wanted to defeat Long Chen in Sword Mountain and seize the sacred sword, he had to find Lu Xian. But he never thought that Long Chen would block the 3 of them in front of so many people at this time. The surrounding people also looked like they were watching a play, but they all held their swords in their hands, waiting for the right time to strike. The sacred sword in Long Chen's hand was enough to make everyone covet it. Qin Zide waved his hand, and more than 30 people stood out from the crowd behind the 3 of them. These 30 people were the ones who entered the city with them. Qin Zide stared at Long Chen, and a playful smile appeared on his face. He said in a deep voice, "It's better for you to know your place." Qin Zide was a smart person. He wanted to seize the sacred sword, but he didn't want to take it from Long Chen's hands in front of everyone. Especially under such circumstances. The sacred sword's name was too famous, but it was also a hot potato. Long Chen naturally understood Qin Zide's intentions. Among the thousands of spectators, there were probably close to 10 families that had enmity with the Qin family and the other 2 families. If they obtained the sacred sword today, these people would definitely attack. But today, he didn't want to let Qin Zide go. He wanted to establish his power. In fact, this was also why Long Chen came to Sword Saint City. Know your place? For simple words, sometimes you have to pay with your life, and today is the day you lose your lives. Long Chen roared, and a ray of light flashed on the scabbard. The innate purple chi in all directions gathered into a sword ray that slashed towards the 30 people led by Qin Zide. Qin Zide and the other 2's faces darkened. Their bodies trembled as they soared into the sky. The innate purple chi behind them condensed and didn't disperse. It turned into bursts of thunderclaps and rumbled endlessly. "Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish today." Qin Zide coldly shouted, and the longsword in his hand slashed towards Long Chen. At the same time, Ding Qiu and the others also attacked. 33 people against 1 person. Suddenly, dozens of figures soared into the sky from the crowd. This is the Liao family and the Sun family. Are they going to make a move? These great clans all have feuds with the Qin clan and the others, so they naturally won't allow the Saint Sword to fall into their hands. However, I'm afraid that no one will be able to leave Sword Saint City after obtaining the Saint Sword today. Once this person dies, I'll snatch the sword. Although these people had concealed their appearances with immortal energy, there were still many people who recognized them. Everyone who had been watching from the sidelines now believed that Long Chen would definitely die. Naturally, they did not want to see the sacred sword fall into the hands of others. However, just as everyone was about to attack, a terrifying scene appeared. Long Chen waved his right hand, and the entire river began to sway. It was as if the dragon veins of the entire mountain range had been forcefully extracted. Condense. Long Chen's voice was deep and resounding. The long sword in his right hand shook, and the entire river that stretched for tens of thousands of miles turned into a sword ray that intersected with the sword in his hand. Hiss. Seeing this scene, Lu Wuqiu could not help but suck in a breath of cold air, and he stared at Long Chen. Now he knew that Long Chen's words were not nonsense. If they were to compare sword moves, he would definitely be defeated within 3 moves. Who is this person? He actually used the power of the sword soul to capture the soul of the sword river. Lu Wuqiu muttered involuntarily. Sword Saint Lu Taishu had cultivated in this mountain for hundreds of years. The sword river had long since contained boundless sword energy, and it had even formed a soul. This was also the reason why Lu Wuqiu had been practicing his sword here, but now Long Chen had easily done something that he could not do. The endless river turned into a magnificent sword ray. Although the long sword was unsheathed, it seemed to hum endlessly. Rumble. The sword ray formed by the endless river swayed slightly, and the attacks of Qin Zide and the others were instantly shattered. The more than 30 people's faces flushed red, and they felt a chill in their chests. They were all sent flying several thousand meters away, and blood was constantly spurting out of their mouths. Who is this person? He can actually use the sword river? Senior Sword Saint has been using this river for nearly 200 years, and this sword actually has a third of his concept. There is absolutely no one on this river that can kill this person. Everyone retreated in shock. No one had thought that Long Chen could actually mobilize the river and borrow the power of Sword Saint Lu Taishu to attack. Qin Zide and the other two's faces changed dramatically, and they were filled with fear. The more than 30 people almost simultaneously used their techniques to defend. Countless innate purple clouds appeared, and mountain ranges stacked on top of each other. All kinds of defensive techniques blocked in front of them. However, in front of this great river, they were completely useless. The endless river condensed without dissipating, and finally became less than 300 meters long. This sword ray was attached to the longsword in Long Chen's hand, which had never been unsheathed. Every inch of this 300-meter-long sword ray seemed to have the power to destroy heaven and earth. If you want to snatch the sword, you'd better think about it carefully. Long Chen's longsword was held horizontally, but his eyes swept over the people behind him. Under the sword ray, this gaze made everyone tremble. For a moment, no one dared to make a sound. When the sword ray fell, Qin Zide and the others immediately let out mournful cries. Under the sword ray, the more than 30 people's attacks all turned into water vapor, and these people directly turned into a pool of blood on the ground. They couldn't be more dead. Only Qin Zide's earthy yellow light soared into the sky, and at the critical moment, protected his soul and broke through the sky. Long Chen was just about to move, but he was stopped by Lu Wuqiu. After a pause, Qin Zide had already disappeared into the horizon, leaving only an echoing voice. I will remember today's grudge. Let Lu Xian bring this person's head to see me, and the sword in his hand. Long Chen frowned, and snorted coldly. He looked deeply at Lu Wuqiu, but didn't say anything. Long Chen looked back, and the 100 sword rays formed by the river in his hand flickered. He pointed at the thousands of people behind him, and said coldly, "Do you still want to snatch the sword?" As soon as he finished speaking, all sides were silent. Many people looked at each other and actually slowly retreated. Everyone knew that on Sword Mountain, there was probably no one who could be Long Chen's opponent. Seeing everyone slowly retreating, Long Chen's eyes fell on Lu Wuqiu again. He said coldly, "Tell your eldest senior brother Lu Xian to come see me." Lu Wuqiu was stunned, and then his face darkened. This was Sword Mountain. Long Chen's words were too arrogant and domineering. But when Lu Wuqiu looked at the sword ray formed by the river in Long Chen's hand, he couldn't help but feel a chill down his spine. Chapter 550. The day of the sword dance. Before Lu Wuqiu could speak, another man arrived on a white crane from the distant horizon. This person was extraordinarily handsome. His white robes resembled a sharp longsword. His spine was particularly strange as it protruded half a meter from his back. Sword spine. When Long Chen saw this person, he didn't seem surprised at all. Born with a sword spine, one's own sword. Born as one with the sword, the soul of the sword was born. There's no need to invite him. I want to see what kind of talented person can use master's sword sparring Long River. The person who spoke was Lu Xian, the person with the natural sword spine. Lu Wuqiu bowed and walked to the side. He said to Lu Xian, "Brother, the sword in this guy's hand is a holy sword. His sword cultivation is also very strong. If it's just sword cultivation, I'm afraid I won't even be able to defeat him in 3 moves." Lu Wuqiu's tone was somewhat disappointed. His master was Sword Saint Lu Taishu and he acknowledged him as his father. It could be said that the Sword Saint was their religion. However, he was defeated so easily. How could he not be disappointed? Lu Xian looked at Lu Wuqiu and comforted him. "You don't have to be like this. You've only been with master for a short period of time. You've only been taught 10 times. When master comes out of seclusion this time, your understanding of sword cultivation will improve. You won't be like this." Lu Wuqiu let out a long sigh and quickly adjusted his state of mind. The two of them were accepted as Lu Taishu's disciples because they thought their foster sons were naturally very talented. Lu Xianjian was fine with Lu Wuqiu, but he suddenly changed the topic and said in a deep voice, "What did the person who escaped just now mean? Why did he ask me to retrieve his sword and kill for him? How did he know I would listen to him?" Lu Xian's voice became colder and colder. There was already a murderous intent. Lu Wuqiu shook his head helplessly and only said the word bone. However, such a simple word caused Lu Xian's pupils to dilate and his eyes to widen. He emitted a soul-stirring chill as if countless swords were about to break out of his body. Lu Xian's breathing was somewhat chaotic. His gaze gradually locked onto Long Chen. Long Chen also looked at him with a faintly discernible smile on his face. Their eyes met, and the 3 of them actually didn't speak for a moment. After a short while, Long Chen laughed out loud. His sword sheath moved in the air, and the 300 long sword light once again fell into the dried-up riverbed, and then it transformed into an endless stream of water. He stared at Lu Xian and said calmly, "Meditation is the foundation of the sword. You don't look like Lu Taishu's disciple." After Long Chen spoke, Lu Xian and Lu Wuqiu's sword light fluctuated. Lu Xian said coldly, "How dare you disrespect my master? Even the ruler of the 10th heaven doesn't dare to call him by his name." Long Chen looked at their serious expressions and couldn't help but think back to his previous life when he had first entered this mountain. In his previous life, he had lived in Sword Mountain for more than 20 years. He was both a teacher and a friend of Lu Taishu's 3 foster sons. But now, this scene made him somewhat speechless. Long Chen did not explain. He just changed the topic and said, "Bones? It's the deep blue spine, right? Deep blue spine." As soon as Long Chen's voice fell, Lu Xian and Lu Wuqiu subconsciously took a step back and stared at Long Chen with vigilance. The deep blue spine was rumored to be a demonic beast that had gone extinct 100,000 years ago. This beast was proficient in thousands of transformations, and its spine was the essence. However, no one knew that Lu Xian was actually the owner of the deep blue illusion beast's bloodline inheritance. This was a secret that no one except Lu Wuqiu knew. Even Sword Saint Lu Taishu didn't know. As for how Qinzide knew, Lu Xian had no idea. Over the years, he had secretly searched through various channels, but he didn't have the slightest clue. He didn't expect Qin Zide to personally deliver it to him. But now, what shocked him wasn't Qin Zide, but Long Chen in front of him. In the eyes of the two, Long Chen was really mysterious, like a bottomless lake. Holding a holy sword, directly calling the Sword Saint's name, and moving the sword river. He even knew everything about the dim blue spine. In reality, Long Chen originally didn't know that the item Qin Zide used to threaten Lu Xian was the deep blue spine. However, after hearing Lu Wuqiu's words, he completely understood. In his previous life, when he met the two of them, he knew that Lu Xian had the deep blue illusion beast's bloodline. This bloodline caused him to experience the pain of having his bones removed and his soul burned every 3 years. If that was all, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, ever since his bloodline awakened, he had already gotten used to the pain of having his soul burned. However, as his sword cultivation increased, the sword spine on his back gradually started to absorb the power of his cultivation at irregular intervals. This caused his strength to sometimes be unfathomable, and sometimes completely become an ordinary person. This was also why he rarely stepped out of the death hall where Sword Saint City was located. If he was slightly careless, he would die an unnatural death. In his previous life, even though Lu Xian reached the Sky Immortal Realm, he didn't solve this problem and couldn't find the deep blue spine. In the end, when the power of his bloodline erupted again, he had no choice but to give up the sword spine. However, the future of his sword cultivation was completely ruined. Long Chen stared at Lu Xian and couldn't help but shake his head. These two people were too stubborn. If he told this to Lu Taishu, he would probably be able to find the deep blue spine in less than 10 years in the 10 heavens. It wouldn't cause irreversible consequences in his previous life, Long Chen said in a deep voice, "You can't take away this sword, nor can you take away my head. However, if you want to obtain the deep blue spine, it's not impossible." Just as Long Chen and Lu Xian were discussing, Long Chen's name had already spread throughout the Dead Spirit Hall area of the 10th heaven. "Have you heard? The young man with the sacred sword actually came from the ancient Desolation land. No wonder he appeared in the Bright Moon Ancient clan as soon as he appeared. The boundary crossing stone is located in the Bright Moon Ancient clan. This is probably why he used the position of the Holy Sword to kill all the higher-ups of the Bright Moon Ancient clan. Not only that, but this person also brought the sacred sword to Sword Saint City's Sword Mountain. On Sword Mountain, this person directly killed the Ding family's star son Ding Qiu, the Zhao family's Zhao Shan, and a group of people. It is said that this person stood out in the Battle of Heaven Wasteland and caused the battle to end prematurely. Many news about Long Chen spread rapidly, including the news that he came from the ancient Desolation land. Many people were surprised by his combat power, but even more people didn't believe the rumors at all. Instead, they were resentful of Long Chen. Many of these people had participated in the Battle of Heaven Wasteland. In their opinion, Long Chen ending the Battle of Heaven Wasteland prematurely was a huge loss for them. However, regardless of whether they believed it or not, at this moment, the large families in the Death Hall had sent experts to Sword Saint City. Originally, Sword Saint City was a place that many experts were unwilling to set foot in, but now it was already crowded. Chapter 551. Sword Saint Duel. The day of the Sword Dance is also the day when the Sword Saint comes out of seclusion. It is a grand event in the entire 10th heaven. The people who gathered in Sword Saint City today are all masters of the 10th heaven, including many heavenly palace stars. Above the Sword Mountain, the Sword River stretched for a long time. The two sides of the Sword River were crowded with people, and everyone had a sword at their waist. Rumble. The earth shook, and an old man with black hair and a white beard stepped on a long sword, standing between heaven and earth like a light rainbow. The moment the old man appeared, everyone in the Sword Mountain and even the Sword Saint City bowed respectfully. However, the old man's eyes were as deep as the starry sky, turning a blind eye to everyone. If one looked carefully, they would find that the old man's black hair was tied into 9 long braids. A cool breeze blew past, and wherever the long hair passed, there were bursts of light that pierced through the void. It was extremely terrifying. After looking at the old man's head, one's gaze was immediately attracted by his eyes. His eyes were black and without any white, as if they were the eternal night. Without these 2 points, one might think that he was just an old man next door. Lips that were not thick or thin, a slightly sunken nose bridge, not many wrinkles, not too long or short, and his clothes were neat and tidy. However, such a person was enough to make the Lord of the Nether Ghost of the 10th Heaven respect him. The name of the Sword Saint is not a realm. Those who have reached the pinnacle are called saints. The sword light under the old man's feet dissipated, then turned into thousands of blue raindrops and fell into the sword river. The sword river rose, and the sword blade condensed. Lu Taishu didn't say a word from beginning to end. Countless powerhouses watched, but no one dared to make the slightest sound. However, just as the sword river condensed to 100 feet, Lu Taishu's pitch-black eyebrows furrowed tightly. He frowned, but the surroundings became more and more quiet, and even the sound of heartbeats disappeared. Lu Taishu murmured. "Who moved the sword river?" "Xian, your sword Dao cultivation has improved again." Lu Xian, Lu Wuqiu, and a 17 or 18-year-old young man were standing at the source of the sword river. At this moment, hearing this, their expressions immediately became extremely respectful. Lu Xian took a deep look at Long Chen. He rose into the air and cupped his fists. "My sword soul doesn't have this ability yet. I'm unable to guide Master's sword power, is that Wuqiu?" Lu Taishu asked. Lu Wuqiu shook his head and didn't say anything. Lu Taishu never liked to talk too much. Lu Wuqiu had been Lu Taishu's disciple for dozens of years, but he had barely spoken 1,000 sentences with Lu Taishu. In the past, when Lu Taishu came out of seclusion, he never said a word. Today was an exception. When many people's eyes fell on Long Chen, Lu Taishu gradually looked at Long Chen. However, a scene that left everyone dumbfounded appeared. They saw Long Chen take a step forward and actually soar into the air. His hands were behind his back, and his long robe fluttered in the wind, but there was a sense of elegance about him. Hiss! There was an uproar from all directions. Everyone was staring at Long Chen. The silence from before was broken in an instant. Who is this person? He actually dares to be so rude to Senior Sword Saint. Does he want to die? You still don't know, right? This person is Long Chen, who crossed over from the ancient desolate land a few days ago. However, he's just a virtual immortal. How dare he act so recklessly? What is this kid trying to do? He's actually flying towards Senior Sword Saint. Everyone was shocked. Such disrespect to the Sword Saint. The slightest carelessness would lead to eternal damnation. Even Lu Xian and the other two were stunned. They didn't expect Long Chen to suddenly do this. Lu Xian's face darkened as he shouted, "Long Chen, quickly retreat." However, just as he was about to rush out and stop Long Chen, he saw Lu Taishu gently wave his hand. A faint smile appeared on his face. He stared at Long Chen as if he wanted to see through Long Chen. When Long Chen was less than 10 meters away from him, he nodded slightly and said, "My sword river is for you to use." Long Chen didn't say anything. He waved the sword in his right hand before unsheathing it. Almost half of the sword light formed by Lu Taishu's sword river landed in front of Long Chen's sword. When everyone saw this, they couldn't help but break out in cold sweat for Long Chen. He actually dared to snatch a sword from the Sword Saint. Not bad, not bad. However, Lu Taishu's starry black eyes seemed to flash as he praised Long Chen. Long Chen stared at Lu Taishu. His heart couldn't help but feel a sense of desolation. Lu Taishu had once walked out of this sword mountain for Long Chen. That day, he'd fought more than 10 sovereigns with one sword. In the end, Long Chen had died, and he'd broken his sword and fled in defeat. Lu Taishu, a sword saint. However, he was a lonely person. He'd never had a woman by his side in his life. He'd only had many disciples to accompany him. He'd only taken 3 disciples each time, and he'd take them as his foster sons. When the 3 of them reached the peak of Sword Dao, he'd kick them out of the Sword Mountain. Every time one of them died, he'd taken another foster son to make up the number of 3. Longchen still didn't know the reason for this. In his heart, Lu Taishu was an old man who protected his children. In his previous life, if he hadn't already taken in Lu Xian and the other two as his disciples, he wouldn't have made an exception to take in Longchen as his disciple. However, because of this, he discussed the sword with Longchen for more than 20 years. In the end, they'd become like a teacher, a friend, and a foe. In the final battle, he'd even stepped out of the sword mountain for him to fight against the sovereigns of 10 directions heaven. "Why have you come here?" Lu Taishu stared at Longchen. He seemed to be somewhat interested in him. Saints had always been lonely. To be able to capture Sword River from his hands, this person's sword Dao cultivation was clearly extraordinary. He was naturally very interested. This scene seemed to reappear in his previous life. Longchen instinctively said, "To discuss the sword." To discuss the sword. He wanted to discuss the sword with Sword Saint Lu Taishu. Longchen's words shocked everyone and caused a huge uproar. Did I hear wrongly? He wants to discuss the sword with Sword Saint Lu Taishu. He's playing to the gallery. I think this person's sword Dao isn't bad, but how can it be compared to Senior Lu Taishu? It's ridiculous. On the Sword Mountain, only sword saints danced with their swords. Everyone watched the sword Dao, but no one dared to speak up. However, today, someone stepped forward to discuss the sword. When the words "discuss the sword" came out, Lu Taishu seemed to be slightly taken aback. Then, he couldn't help but tremble. His eyes suddenly became as sharp as a sword. He raised his head and laughed. No one had ever seen Sword Saint Lu Taishu like this. Good, good, good. Today, I'll discuss the sword with you. Lu Taishu's good 3 times in a row stunned Lu Xian and the others. They looked at each other. In their hearts, they took Longchen a little more seriously. However, it was only a little more. As for the outcome, they never thought about it. In this world, no one could beat Lu Taishu in Sword Dao. Because he was a sword saint. A Sword Dao saint. Longchen also smiled. He didn't come today just to discuss the sword. He also wanted to break Lu Taishu's Sword Dao shackles. Chapter 552. The might of a sword saint. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Longchen and Lu Taishu actually made a sword exchange agreement. Everyone was very disdainful of Longchen, thinking that he came from the ancient desolate land. Even if his sword Dao was somewhat strange, he couldn't be compared to Lu Taishu. The purpose of this sword competition was just to please the crowd and gain some fame. After all, being able to duel with a sword saint was enough to make him famous in the 10th heaven. However, just as everyone was mocking him, a playful smile appeared at the corner of Longchen's mouth. He suddenly said, "Before the sword duel, you should solve the problem of your disciple, Lu Xian." As soon as Longchen finished speaking, Lu Xian was startled. Lu Xian stared at Longchen with a dark expression and couldn't help but shout, "Longchen, the method you told me yesterday wasn't like this." Seeing an old friend for the first time today, Longchen was in a good mood and couldn't help but laugh. Yesterday, he told Lu Xian that he would help him obtain the Qin family's blue spine and even give him advice. However, now he was going to tell Lu Taishu about it. Lu Taishu frowned and seemed unhappy. He asked Lu Xian in a deep voice, "What's the matter?" Lu Xian had always been unwilling to tell Lu Taishu about himself, but when Lu Taishu asked, he didn't dare to lie. Lu Xian glared fiercely at Longchen and then told him about the blue illusion beast bloodline and the Qin family's possession of the blue spine. When Lu Taishu heard this, he frowned but then gradually relaxed. He nodded. "As long as you obtain the blue spine, your body will be fine?" "Yes, master." Lu Xian seemed to be in awe of Lu Taishu. However, Longchen looked at Lu Taishu with a smile. This was why he lied to Lu Xian. He thought he knew that Lu Xian and the others' biggest mistake was to misjudge Lu Taishu. Lu Taishu didn't like trouble and didn't like to talk too much, but he was absolutely protective of his disciples before they left the mountain. As soon as Lu Xian finished speaking, Lu Taishu looked down from above and said indifferently, "Qin family, hand over the blue spine bone within 3 days. If you don't have it, I'll give your family a sword." Wang. As Lu Taishu's voice faded, half of the sword river in his right hand left his hand and transformed into a long sword that pierced through the air. It was heading in the direction of the Qin clan, the undead spirit hall. There was an uproar in the crowd. Dozens of people couldn't help but jump into the air with ugly faces. They immediately shouted to Lu Taishu, Senior Sword Sage, "Please calm down. Please calm down. What deep blue spine? My clan doesn't have it at all. My clan's Qin Zide has a grudge against Long Chen. This person is definitely framing him. Qin Zide doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth, speaking nonsense without thinking. When we return to the clan, we will definitely punish him severely. Senior Sword Saint, please investigate." As these people spoke, their eyes were filled with murderous intent as they stared at Long Chen. They were obviously here because of Qin Zide and the fact that Long Chen's sacred sword had turned around. However, no one expected that Long Chen would directly expose Qin Zide's words from a few days ago. Lu Xian had left the mountain many times for the deep blue spine and used all kinds of secret methods to search for it. Originally, no one knew about this. However, one time when Lu Xian's cultivation was fluctuating, a Qin family disciple accidentally discovered it and saw Lu Xian's true appearance. This Qin family disciple was Qin Zide. Thus, Qin Zide knew that what Lu Xian was looking for was the deep blue spine. Speaking of which, it was quite a coincidence. Although this bone was rare, the Qin family had one. However, this bone was a part of the Qin family's ancestral magic artifact. Thus, everyone still refused despite seeing this. If it was any other item, they would have offered it up with both hands. However, at this moment, the Qin family disciple in the lead seemed to have sensed something and hurriedly took out a talisman from his storage ring. The black light on the talisman flickered continuously. He waved his hand and threw the talisman into the sky. As the talisman landed, a light screen appeared. It was the scene outside the Qin family's residence. The moment the light screen appeared, everyone felt their backs drenched in cold sweat. They stared at Lu Taishu in the sky with reverence. The light screen showed the current scene in the Qin family's residence. 10,000 meters above the residence, a sword ray cut across the sky. The dozens of Qin family members were drenched in cold sweat. Their legs turned to jelly and they all knelt on the ground, trembling. Lu Taishu had been too low-key all these years. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to threaten Lu Xian so fearlessly for a mere Qin Zide. Lu Taishu said indifferently, 3 days, the deep blue spirit's spine. Remember. The Qin family members couldn't help but nod. How could they have the courage to refuse? Right after Lu Taishu spoke, he acted as if nothing had happened and said to Long Chen, "Sparring in the sword?" Long Chen said with a smile, "Sword competition." As soon as they finished speaking, the celestial power in their bodies dissipated, and they slowly descended from the sky. The sword light formed by half a river in Long Chen's hand fell into the riverbed once again. When the two landed on the ground, the surrounding people had already moved 10,000 meters away. No one expected Sword Saint Lu Taishu to really want to have a sword competition with Long Chen today. At this moment, the two of them were extremely ordinary in the eyes of the crowd. They were like ordinary people because if they wanted to have a sword competition, they wouldn't compete in cultivation. If they were to compete in cultivation, Long Chen probably wouldn't be a match for one of Lu Taishu's attacks. First, we'll compete in sword techniques. From complex to simple, from low to high. Long Chen's expression changed slightly. He put 2 fingers together and formed a sword. Lu Taishu nodded slightly and didn't say anything. His right hand's 2 fingers also formed a sword. The surrounding people looked over. There were even many people who were proficient in formations that directly transmitted this place to every corner of the Sword Saint city. Sword techniques? Senior Sword Saint actually wants to have a sword competition with this person. This person is quite good at pretending. However, it's not wise to compete in sword techniques first. He's just a country bumpkin. Perhaps he obtained a lot of good things by chance. Otherwise, how could he wield a holy sword? Isn't competing in sword techniques with senior sword saint asking for trouble? How old is this person? How many sword techniques can he use? When the crowd heard that Longchen wanted to have a sword competition first, they couldn't help but sneer. Lu Taishu had been famous for a long time. He had probably been at Sword Mountain for hundreds of years. His accumulation of sword techniques was evident. In terms of age, Longchen already couldn't win against Lu Taishu in terms of sword techniques. Lu Xian, Lu Wuqiu, and a 17 or 18-year-old youth next to them were the closest. They all shook their heads. They had seen Longchen's cultivation in the sword Dao. It was indeed somewhat incisive. It even surpassed the two of them. It wasn't wise to have a sword competition in the first round of a sword competition. While the crowd was discussing, Longchen had already made the first move. He pointed his sword forward and began to brandish it. His sword techniques were extremely complicated. Sometimes he cut out sword flowers, sometimes he moved up and down, chopping, stabbing, cutting. His sword techniques went from complex to simple, from low to high. Chapter 553. From beginning to end, one move in one sword. His fingers were like blades, and his body was like a swimming dragon. 100 breaths passed in the blink of an eye. After Longchen's set of sword moves, those who didn't understand were drowsy and couldn't see the trick. The level of this sword move was too low. No one even had the desire to watch it. On the other hand, Lu Xian and Lu Taishu were slightly surprised. Although Longchen's sword moves were ordinary, they were extremely pure and perfect. His feet paused, and his sword stopped. Lu Taishu moved next. Everyone was still watching, but they realized that Lu Taishu's and Longchen's sword moves were equally boring. Longchen and Lu Taishu were exchanging blows with their sword fingers. Longchen and Lu Taishu were actually exchanging blows with their sword fingers. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. At this moment, everyone's calm faces were filled with shock. Longchen and Lu Taishu were evenly matched in terms of sword moves. Compared to their mortal sword moves, they were now able to casually use immortal techniques. They didn't use their immortal power, but everyone could feel the murderous intent in their sword fingers. Are we still competing? No. A draw? A draw! Lu Taishu's originally calm eyes seemed to be burning with flames. He took the lead to ask Longchen. Longchen agreed with a smile. A draw? This person's sword moves are actually a draw with Senior Sword Saint. The two of them, one at the front and one at the back, have used a total of 531 types of sword moves. The lowest is 1st grade moral rank, and the highest is 9th grade immoral rank. This person has some strength, but Senior Sword Saint must be going easy on him. Otherwise, if they continue to compete, will he be able to use true immortal techniques? Everyone discussed animatedly. Longchen had used more than 500 types of sword moves in a row, which made people look at him in a different light. However, that was all there was to it. Next, they competed with their sword intent. Above their sword fingers, astral winds would sometimes wreak havoc, and sometimes torrential rain would burst forth. In an instant, everything within 10,000 meters was swaying. The two of them still didn't use their immortal power, but at this moment, they caused many strange phenomena. The onlookers were aghast, their eyes filled with shock. If one were to say that the sword moves were boring, then this sword intent was incomparably gorgeous. In the blink of an eye, another 10 days had passed. Lu Xian and the others, as well as the onlookers, were all staring at Longchen. In the past 10 days, his sword intent was actually on par with Lu Taishu's. Are we still competing? I'm not competing anymore. A draw? A draw! The two of them opened their mouths again, but this time, it was Longchen who asked first. Another draw! Longchen was able to tie with the Sword Saint in terms of sword moves, and now he was able to tie with the sword intent. Everyone had a whole new level of respect for Longchen. Everyone knows that even though Longchen was defeated, his name still shook the 10th heaven. Next, let's compete with the power of the sword soul. When the two of them unleashed their sword souls, the crowd was already somewhat numb. No one had thought that Long Chen would actually possess a sword soul. Sword moves, sword intent, sword soul, sword force, etc. As long as it was related to the sword, the two of them fought one by one, and it took them a full 2 months. However, no one left the Sword Mountain, and no one even moved half an inch. Is this person really from the ancient desolate land? He didn't show any signs of being defeated at all. How old is he? He can actually compete with the Sword Saint to such an extent. How is this possible? It's been 2 months, but the two of them still haven't decided a winner. Bang! As soon as the crowd finished speaking, Long Chen and Lu Taishu stopped fighting at the same time. Lu Taishu looked at Long Chen as if he was looking at a peerless piece of jade, but he knew that Long Chen wouldn't worship him as a teacher because Long Chen's understanding of the Sword Dao has already reached the peak. When Lu Taishu was about to attack again, Long Chen shook his head and refused. Long Chen stared at Lu Taishu and said, "There's no need to compete, today's sword competition ends here." Huh? Lu Taishu frowned, not knowing why Long Chen suddenly stopped the sword competition. The people around them also didn't know why, but at this moment, the two of them still only had one competition to decide a winner. Long Chen stared at Lu Taishu, and his eyes suddenly lit up. His divine consciousness grew stronger, and his voice was like rolling thunder. "You and I have competed for 2 months, and the backbone of the Sword Dao has already been understood. Don't you understand? Don't you understand?" As soon as Long Chen finished speaking, everyone felt a sword piercing into the depths of their souls, but it returned to normal in an instant. However, the Sword Saint Lu Taishu in front of Long Chen was stunned, and his sword fingers were still slowly separated. Lu Xian and Lu Wuqiu jumped up and stood in front of Long Chen. They frowned and said coldly, "What do you want to do?" "What do you mean?" Long Chen was silent, and he just stared at Lu Taishu. He opened his mouth again and said, "How can the Sword Dao end?" Boom, crack, crack. Long Chen's voice sounded again. His calm voice made everyone confused, but they didn't know what he meant. However, just as he finished speaking, boundless sword light instantly condensed in the sky behind Lu Taishu. Every sword light emitted a killing intent that made one's heart tremble. What's going on? Hurry up and tell this person to shut up. Don't anger the Sword Saint. Is this person really giving pointers to the Sword Saint? Does he not want to live anymore? Countless spectators were terrified, and they stared at the sky behind Lu Taishu. If these sword rays fell, no one here would be able to survive. Even Lu Xian and the others couldn't help but turn pale, and they all knelt on one knee. Lu Taishu's pitch-black eyes, which were like the starry sky, landed on Long Chen. Wherever his gaze landed, there seemed to be cold sword rays tearing through space, and it was extremely terrifying. Long Chen took a few steps back. Under this terrifying pressure, he felt an unprecedented sense of danger, but he didn't avert his eyes at all. His 2 months of sword sparring was for this moment to enlighten Lu Taishu. In his previous life, Long Chen cultivated under Lu Taishu's tutelage for more than 20 years, and in the end, he won after 153 days of sword sparring. That sword sparring caused his name to spread throughout the 10 regions, and in a few decades, he stepped into the ranks of the strongest rulers. Lu Taishu also saw the shackles of his own Sword Dao through Long Chen. Long Chen came today to help him break through the shackles. The cause of the past, the effect of today. Where there is cause, there is effect. The Sword Dao has a beginning, and there must be an end. Long Chen spoke again. But at this moment, as his words fell, Lu Taishu staggered back a few hundred meters. His eyes were filled with struggle, and then he came to a sudden realization. The sword light that filled the sky behind him instantly dissipated, and he returned to his original state. No one felt that he had broken through, but everyone noticed that his temperament had undergone a tremendous change. Lu Taishu stared at Long Chen with gratitude. In the end, he shook his head and laughed. He said, "There is actually such a peerless beauty in the world. Today, on Sword Mountain, I will practice sword sparring for you for 3 days. Chapter 554. Stealing the title of Sword Saint, Lu Taishu's bow caused the four forces to turn pale with fright. They had never seen Sword Saint Lu Taishu bow. Many people felt uneasy. Long Chen's name would definitely spread throughout the 10th heaven. However, no one continued to investigate this matter. Everyone's eyes fell on Sword Saint Lu Taishu. Lu Taishu began to wield his sword. Swish. 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 Countless experts on Sword Mountain sat down cross-legged. They had swords at their waists, and faint sword intent flowed around their bodies. The experts in Sword Saint City and Sword Saint Mountain all had pious looks on their faces. Nearly 90% of the people here were sword cultivators. Longchen was the same. He sat at the front with Lu Xian and the others, looking up at Lu Taishu in the sky. Longchen's eyes were full of respect. Longchen respected Lu Taishu very much. In his previous life, although he defeated Lu Taishu in swordsmanship, he knew clearly that if the two of them fought with sword Dao, he would definitely lose. Because the Dao in his heart was not sword Dao. There were countless experts in the 10th heaven. Perhaps there were many who were stronger than Lu Taishu, but he was the only one who could be called a sword saint. Rays of light shot out in all directions, and immortal power flowed throughout Sword Mountain. The leaves and branches swayed, and there was the sound of a sword breaking through the air. The river had also turned into sword light in his hand. The sword danced, and the wind and clouds moved. Buzz! 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 Countless swords hummed at the foot of Sword Mountain, and the swords at everyone's waists seemed to come alive at this moment. Sword! 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 Countless people shouted subconsciously, and then the swords at their waists seemed to be drawn to the 9 heavens, as if they were going to break through the sky and cut across the horizon. The swords turned into a torrent, soaring in the air with Lu Taishu's sword dance. For a moment, the entire Sword Mountain seemed to have become another world, a world full of sword Dao. Outside Sword Saint Mountain, the Qin family's members looked gloomy and uncertain. Looking at the sword intent in the sky, they were terrified. At the front of the group, Qin Zide's soul was kneeling on the ground, his face full of resentment. Patriarch, we can't let this matter go. Pa! Just as Qin Zide finished speaking, a gust of wind directly knocked his soul to the ground. A middle-aged man with silver hair said coldly, "We have already handed over the deep blue spine. Our clan's magic weapon is now broken. This is all because you provoked Lu Xian. When Lu Taishu was still in Longchen, the Qin family had sent the blue spine to Sword Saint Mountain, but they had not left for a long time. The indigo spine was too important to the Qin family. Without it, the Qin family would quickly decline." Qin Zide's spirit flickered, and he knelt on the ground again. He said in a cold voice, "Sword Saint Lu Taishu, we can't provoke him, and we can't take back the deep blue spine. However, as long as we can seize Long Chen's sacred sword and offer it to the 10th Heavenly Palace, our clan will surpass the Bright Moon Ancient Clan's position." Under the 10th Heavenly Palace, there were a total of 10 great halls. They were divided into the upper 3 halls, the middle 3 halls, and the lower 3 halls. Among them, the first hall was guarded by a sovereign realm expert who was directly under the Heavenly Palace's command. As for the lower 3 halls of the Bright Moon Ancient Clan, the original guardian of the Death Hall was the Bright Moon Clan. The silver-haired middle-aged man coldly snorted and said, "Sword Saint Lu Taishu has always been mysterious and low-key. He has never asked about the affairs of the various clans in the heavenly domain. We can only admit defeat for the indigo spine, but we must avenge him." And the sacred sword in his hand. This time, the Bright Moon Clan no longer has a foothold in the 10th heaven. Our Qin family will be in charge of the Death Hall. In that case, our clan must rush to get the sacred sword and send it directly to the Heavenly Palace before the people of the Middle Mountain Palace arrive. At that time, even if our clan can't become the guardian clan of the Middle Mountain Palace, we can replace the Bright Moon Clan and control the life and death of the Death Hall. As soon as this person's voice fell, the people around nodded. With the appearance of the sacred sword and the death of all the high-level members of the Bright Moon Clan, the people of the Middle Mountain Palace will inevitably arrive soon. At that time, the Qin family will no longer have to worry about them. If they want more sacred swords, they must solve this matter before the powerhouses of the Middle Mountain Palace arrive. But when the people of the Qin family looked at the torrent of swords in the Sword Saint City, they all fell silent. After a while, someone finally spoke. It is said that this person is on par with Lu Taishu in the sword competition. Lu Taishu also performed sword dance for him for 3 days. Will Lu Taishu protect this person? At this time, Qin Zide, who only had his divine soul left, spoke again. As long as he leaves the Sword Saint City, we can kill him and take the sacred sword. Even Lu Taishu won't be an enemy of the Heavenly Palace for this person. I have a plan to kill this person quickly and seize the sacred sword. 3 days passed in a flash. Lu Taishu performed sword dance for 3 days. Everyone in the Sword Saint City seemed to have fallen into a state of epiphany, including Lu Xian and the other two. Only Longchen stood up slowly, looked at Lu Taishu, and said in a deep voice, "This one has a request." Lu Taishu bowed slightly. He already regarded Longchen as a peer. In his eyes, he didn't care about cultivation at all. Based on the sword competition 3 days ago, Longchen was enough to make him look at him in a new light. Seeing that Lu Taishu had agreed, Longchen said, "I need 3 months." Longchen knew that he had become the target of public criticism by using the sacred sword to end the Battle of Heaven Wasteland. If this continued, he wouldn't have the slightest chance to breathe. He didn't care about the various races of the Death Hall, but once the experts of the middle 3 halls and the upper 3 halls appeared, it would be difficult for him to deal with them. He needed time, and he was almost certain that his mother was in the 10th heaven, in the Heavenly Palace. The Ghost Ruler was an expert he had to face in this life. If he guessed correctly, the day he fought with the Ghost Ruler was the day a transcendent ruler would appear to accept a disciple. Everything from his previous life was about to happen. When he faced the Ghost Ruler, he had to reach the heavenly immortal realm. As for the transcendent ruler, he had to settle the score slowly. The 10 heavens were mountains placed in front of Longchen, but Longchen had to cross them one by one. The enmity of his previous life, he had to pay it back 100 times in this life. Lu Taishu also seemed to feel the biting cold murderous intent around Longchen. He nodded and said, "In 3 months, no one in the Death Hall area will dare to attack you." Longchen bowed and thanked him. With Lu Taishu's words, he naturally felt more at ease. Longchen turned to leave, but was stopped by Lu Taishu. "You and I only have a sword competition, and the winner hasn't been decided yet. If you dare to compete, I will lower my cultivation to the same level as you." Lu Taishu couldn't help but emit a fighting spirit. He couldn't remember how many years it had been since he last met someone he could fight. Chapter 555. Secrets of the Sword Spirit. Longchen left without looking back, leaving Lu Taishu standing there in a daze. After a while, Lu Taishu couldn't help but laugh out loud. He had never been so happy in his life. Humans were most afraid of loneliness, even more so for the strong. Sword Saints were even more so. Ancient desolate land? Stealing my Sword Saint title, the following days are going to be interesting. Lu Taishu's deep eyes seemed to be filled with battle intent. As he finished speaking, he pointed to the sky, and streaks of sword radiance and immortal power surged out from his fingertips. All the swords and weapons in the Sword Saint City once again turned into a torrent and gathered within the city. Lu Taishu stepped on his flying sword and stood in the sky. His voice was like thunder as it rumbled. "Within 3 months, I guarantee Longchen's safety. Within 3 months, I guarantee Longchen's safety." 3 months, the rumbling voice spread throughout the entire Death Spirit Hall. Countless strong cultivators, even those who were a million miles away, felt that the voice was right beside their ears. Tens of thousands of meters above the Death Spirit Hall, there seemed to be a meteor that stopped in the sky. Everyone knew that it wasn't a meteor, but Sword Saint Lu Taishu's sword radiance. It was a sword that hung above the entire Death Spirit Hall. However, those who disobeyed would only die. This was Sword Saint Lu Taishu's power. Longchen, who was about to leave the city, couldn't help but smile when he saw this. Lu Taishu had stepped into the sovereign realm long ago, and he had been known as the Sword Saint for a long time. However, in reality, his cultivation had been stuck at the first stage of the sovereign realm, which was the Nirvana realm. In his previous life, he was able to break through the Nirvana realm and reach the Yin-Yang realm because of the sword competition with Long Chen. His sword Dao was exceptional, but he was too stubborn and couldn't extricate himself from it. As such, Long Chen's words woke him up. According to his previous life's experience, Lu Taishu would reach the Yin-Yang realm in a few months. Otherwise, Lu Taishu wouldn't have helped him just because of the sword competition. There were a total of 4 stages in the sovereign realm: Nirvana, Yin-Yang, 6 paths, and Empyrean. In his previous life, Long Chen was an connecting heaven sovereign expert. According to his knowledge, the number of connecting heaven sovereign experts in the entire 10 directions heaven domain could be counted on one hand. He left the holy city with his sword in hand. The Qin clan was still there. The Qin family members stared with ashen faces at Long Chen and the unsheathed holy sword in his hand. However, Long Chen only glanced at them and then left. Seeing Long Chen leave, no one from the Qin clan dared to make a move. Because of the sword hanging in the sky like a beam, a long time after Long Chen left, the silver-haired patriarch of the Qin family let out a long sigh. His voice was so low that it was almost inaudible, but it was filled with killing intent as he said, "Act according to Qin Zide's plan, but remember that no one else can know about it. Seize the sacred sword and send it to the 10th heavenly palace as soon as possible. At that time, I don't believe that Lu Taishu will be willing to go to war with the heavenly palace for this person." When Qin Zide, who only had his divine soul left, heard the silver-haired, middle-aged man's order, he couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. Then, the Qin clan members left one after another. Qin Zide's divine soul swept through the sky, while he and the 5 earth immortal experts headed due west. On the other side, Long Chen had already thrown the Qin clan to the back of his mind. To him, the Qin clan was nothing to worry about. In a situation where he didn't use the sacred sword, he had nothing left to protect himself. Now, his first priority was to increase his cultivation as quickly as possible or to completely control this sacred sword. Sword spirit, come out. Long Chen's immortal core power shook as he shouted. The poignant woman's figure appeared, standing on the sword like a fairy's soul. Long Chen asked, "When can this sword be unsheathed at will?" The woman didn't even look at Long Chen. She only said indifferently, "Unsheathed at will? You'll never be able to do it." The woman's words made Long Chen frown involuntarily. But what could he do in the face of a sword spirit? He could only let out a long sigh and ask, "You just have to tell me how to do it." The woman turned her beautiful eyes and looked at Long Chen with contempt. She said, "Human, if you want to know, I'll tell you. If you want to unsheath this sword, you need the spiritual wood of heaven, the soul of purgatory, the fire of 9 underworlds, and the soul of the starry sky." Buzz. Hearing this, Long Chen couldn't help but feel a roar in his mind, and he stopped in his tracks. After calming down, Long Chen said seriously, "The spiritual wood of heaven, is it the divine wood of desolation that supports the 10 directions celestial territory? The soul of purgatory is the remnant soul of the soul-refining path of the 6 paths, and the soul of the Lord of Purgatory." Long Chen explained the origins of the 4 items clearly, but his voice was getting lower and lower. Just as the woman said, if he wanted to obtain these 4 items, he was afraid that even if he recovered the cultivation of his previous life, he wouldn't be able to do it. Merely the starry sky soul had only appeared in legends. Supposedly, it was hidden deep within the boundless starry sky, and it was the soul of the stars that filled the sky. A wisp of surprise appeared in the woman's eyes, and she seemed to be slightly surprised that Long Chen actually knew about these things. She said once more, "These 4 items aren't something that can be obtained by your lowly mortal dimension. It's already not easy for you to know about these things." Mortal dimension? Long Chen's pupils constricted abruptly, but the woman didn't have the slightest intention to speak further. Long Chen thought of the connected space above the sword pool, and then he thought of the hidden palace in Eternal Origin Mountain. He faintly felt that the woman probably knew a thing or two about these things. Long Chen took a deep breath and suppressed the bewilderment in his heart. He knew that no matter what this woman was hiding, it was insufficient for him to find out with his current cultivation. Long Chen continued, "Let's not talk about these 4 items for now. What should I do if I want to temporarily unsheath the might of this sword?" When the woman heard this, she seemed to be slightly interested in these words. "This sword is already considered a saint weapon even without these 4 items, but if you want to use it for a short period of time, you must devour the materials used to refine it. The quality of this sword is extremely high. If it wasn't for that, I would have to remain dormant for at least 100 years after entering it as a sword spirit. It's already a great fortune that I can use it for a short period of time." Long Chen nodded slightly. He seemed to be calm on the surface, but he was indescribably shocked in his heart. According to the sword spirit, if the 4 items she mentioned were gathered, this sword could become an immortal weapon. Weapons were different from pills and formations. If one wanted to refine a high-grade weapon, not only did it require a powerful weapon refiner, it also required countless high-grade materials. Everyone in the 10 Directions Sky region knew about the Saint Weapon rankings and Divine Weapon rankings, so it was obvious how rare Saint Weapons and Divine Weapons were. However, since the ancient times, no immortal weapon had ever appeared. Long Chen suddenly sped up, but he said, "What grade of materials do you need to be able to temporarily unsheath the sword?" "The Saint Weapon, of course." Long Chen nodded again and headed east. Surprisingly, the direction was the center of the Death Hall. A faintly discernible smile flashed past the corners of Long Chen's mouth, and he said indifferently, "If I'm not wrong, the grade of your sword spirit is too high. If I use it too many times, I'm afraid this sword will be destroyed." Chapter 556. Unworldly Land. Long Chen flew straight towards the east. In the ancient desolate land, experts above the Saint Realm could tear space and travel, but it was impossible to do so in the Heaven Domain. The Heaven Domain was filled with innate purple gas, and its space was close to the vast starry sky. Once one tore space and entered, even a ruler would be torn apart by the power of the starry sky. This rule may not be obvious in the 10th heaven, but in the 9th heaven or even the 1st heaven, even the ruler of a domain doesn't dare to set foot in it. Fortunately, Long Chen had reached the origin immortal realm, and using his immortal force to travel in the air was not a problem. The journey to the east took a total of 13 days. When Long Chen stopped, his eyes revealed a hint of surprise. The continuous mountain range was like a giant blade in the sky, and a 10,000-meter-long waterfall was majestic and spectacular. However, such a powerful impact did not leave a pool of water on the ground. Instead, the stone mountain within a 1,000-meter radius was washed clean, as smooth as ice. The sunlight reflected a glaring light, and between the reflection of the light, there were clear and crystalline waves. Looking along the smooth stone surface, it turned out that because of the terrain, this huge ice waterfall had actually turned into a small stream, flowing down the mountain in all directions. Such a beautiful and peaceful scene made Long Chen very surprised. Because this place should not be like this, if he remembered correctly, this should be a barren land of black soil, and this waterfall should be a huge scorched earth stone gate. How can this be? I clearly remember the spatial coordinates of this place, and I'm definitely not wrong. This is the scorched earth mine. Long Chen muttered to himself. Buzz. As soon as his words fell, Long Chen's divine sense spread out, covering the sky and earth. His divine sense instantly covered a 10,000-meter radius. Long Chen's brows furrowed tighter and tighter, and after 100 breaths, his eyes suddenly narrowed. There was indeed something strange behind this waterfall. If I didn't know that this waterfall should be the entrance to the scorched earth mine, I'm afraid I wouldn't have investigated it so carefully. Long Chen's divine sense was so powerful that it had even surpassed that of his previous life. However, it still took him 100 breaths before he realized that something was amiss. If it were anyone else, they wouldn't be able to discover the 20-meter-tall cave behind the waterfall even if they were standing at the bottom. Long Chen's celestial elemental energy surged around his body as he dashed toward 1/3 of the waterfall. As he landed, the waterfall was forcefully repelled by his immortal energy. Long Chen's lips curled into a smile. When he reappeared, he was already behind the waterfall. At this moment, he was in the depths of the cave. However, this cave was still very different from his previous life. The four sides of the cave were multicolored and extremely smooth. They intersected with each other in a very orderly manner, as beautiful as the intersecting rainbows on the horizon. Between the intersecting spaces between the smooth-colored cobblestones, there were complicated and messy formation patterns. It was these runes that isolated Long Chen's divine sense. Long Chen walked into the cave, and he couldn't help but be a little more vigilant. The scorched earth mine. In his previous life, it was a blue blood green vein stone mine under the 10th heavenly palace. This kind of ore was used to refine weapons, and the lowest grade was generally divine rank. In his previous life, Long Chen specially came here to perfect the broken heavenly sword. In the end, he finally obtained one of the blue vein source stones with great difficulty. Long Chen still remembered that blue vein source stone clearly. There were hundreds of natural formation patterns on it, and it was an extremely rare divine rank material. At that time, there was a blue vein source stone the size of a small mountain here. It was also because of this that he was chased by the 10th heavenly palace for a full year in his previous life. However, the funny thing was that the broken heavenly sword in his previous life couldn't be repaired at all, and all his hard work was in vain. Long Chen gently stroked the formation patterns with his right hand and carefully observed them. His feet gradually walked deeper into the cave, and after 7 turns, he felt that there was a glimmer of hope in front of him. A baby's cry entered his ears first, followed by a refreshing fragrance of flowers. Long Chen's footsteps paused slightly, and he immediately moved to the entrance of the cave where the light appeared. But when he saw the scene in front of him, he was stunned again and stood there in a daze. Swish! 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 All eyes full of doubts suddenly fell on him. Looking down from above, Long Chen didn't know when he was already 10,000 meters above the ground. As far as his eyes could see, there was a small town built next to a mountain. At the foot of the mountain where Long Chen was located, there were 2 7 or 8 meters wide rivers meandering towards the courtyard. There were even fat fish in them. On both sides of the river, there were many tall women squatting and washing clothes and vegetables. Their smooth fur only covered the key parts. More than 10 meters away, there was a crisscrossing farmland. The farmland occupied almost 70% of this area. There were many grains, vegetables, fruits, flowers, herbs, and so on. There were so many different colors that it was too much for the eyes to take in. In the farmland, there were many strong men. Only the lower part of their bodies was covered by 2 palm-sized pieces of fur. More than 10 meters away, there were houses. The houses were not luxurious, and some were even just made of a few thick logs and huge octagonal leaves. But such a thatched house stretched all the way to the end of the stream. 2 small streams, a huge mountain, and a village were all in good order. Looking up, the sunlight here was not sunlight, but countless sparkling crystals, as dazzling as the sun. Is this really the scorched earth mine from my previous life? Long Chen stared blankly at the blue bloodstones in the sky. He was almost certain in his heart. If this place was the scorched earth mine from his previous life, then what kind of disaster would come next, and finally turn this place into a scorched earth? Just as Long Chen was thinking, the people below looked at him one by one, their eyes full of hope. Immortals on the divine mountain, look, an immortal is coming. Immortals are so young. Quickly prepare the offerings and bring the huge mountain beast that was hunted a few days ago. Immortals are so handsome. What clothes are you wearing? Doesn't he feel hot? Curious and excited voices came from below. In a short time, a large number of people gathered at the foot of the mountain. There were even many elders who knelt on the ground, their foreheads pressed tightly against the ground. Long Chen looked at this scene and shook his head. In his heart, he already had some idea. He leaped down and slowly landed on the ground. Elders, please rise. I am not the immortal you speak of. It's just that there is a world outside of the divine mountain. Long Chen's right hand flashed with a gentle light, and a gentle force lifted these elders up. Chapter 557. Yusi and Demon. These girls were very curious about Long Chen's attire, but these young girls in their prime were even more infatuated with Long Chen's natural bearing. Many 17 or 18-year-old girls shyly stared at Long Chen, occasionally sneaking glances at him. Long Chen shook his head and laughed in spite of himself. Perhaps because these girls lived here, their skin was as white as milk. Their appearances couldn't be said to be extremely beautiful, but they could still be considered delicate. In particular, there were only 2 pieces of fur on his body. Large chunks of his white skin were exposed to the air, truly causing one's blood to boil. Cough, cough. 2 light coughs sounded from behind the crowd. Many girls shyly shook their long legs and retreated to the side, but they still sneaked glances at Long Chen. Walking over was a stooped old man. His white hair was tied up neatly by a shabby cloth hat. His figure was indeed very short, only reaching Long Chen's waist. However, this old man's attire made Long Chen feel that it was much more normal. At least, his beast skin didn't just cover his lower body, it also slanted up to his shoulders, just covering half of his chest. However, facing such a withered old man dressed in such a valiant hunter's attire, even leaning on a walking stick, it was unavoidably a bit comical. When Long Chen saw this person, he bowed slightly and said, "Elder, I've disturbed you on this trip." The old man's head only reached Long Chen's waist. If he wanted to speak, he would have to raise his head. However, the old man didn't do so. He only said in a hoarse voice, "Child, follow me into the village. How about we talk about the world outside of this body?" Deference is no substitute for obedience. Long Chen naturally agreed. The 2 walked one in front and one behind. The old man walked extremely slowly, and Long Chen only followed behind him. Many young girls also followed with teasing smiles. This actually made some men smile bitterly. On the other side, the Qin family was heading west. The direction just happened to be the opposite of Long Chen. However, at this moment, they were already on their way back. It was unknown when Qin Zide had found a physical body, but this physical body seemed to be unable to fuse with him, and his soul would occasionally appear and reveal its original appearance. Behind him was a person who wasn't an elder of the Qin family, and another who was dressed in a black robe. The robe was covered in white bone patterns, and it was extremely terrifying. About 10 meters in front of them, there was another person. This person's entire body was hidden under the black robe. Even his hands and feet could not be seen. However, there was a long staff on his back. This staff was black and white, and there was a white skull on the top and bottom of the staff. It was very lifelike. The few of them flew in the air, but they were extremely quiet. No one dared to make a sound. Occasionally, there would be people passing by. They would either stay far away or directly kneel down in the air to pay their respects to this person. A moment later, the leader of the black-robed men suddenly stopped in his tracks and asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you sure that person is holding a sacred sword? This matter involves Lu Taishu, we can't afford to lose him." Qin Zide heard this and quickly stopped. He respectfully bowed and said, "Reporting to young master, there is no mistake. The sword in this person's hand is definitely a sacred sword." That day, this person killed almost 80% of the Bright Moon Ancient Clan's peak combat strength with just 2 strikes. There were also tens of thousands of powerhouses. Only a sacred weapon can do such a thing. Yukimo nodded, but his voice was a bit lower as he said, "If this sword is not a sacred weapon, then it is the same as me offending Lu Taishu. Do you know the consequences?" Qin Zide's body was covered in sweat, and his forehead was already covered in white sweat. He quickly said, "Of course I know. When this person used the sacred weapon, not only me, but also people from the Zhao and Ding families saw it." After confirming it several times, the black-robed man sped up. If one looked carefully, they would find that there were 2 fist-sized ghosts in front of him. These ghosts were shaped like mice, and their eyes were shining with green light. There was also a thin line at the tip of their noses. It was these 2 ghosts that were leading them to find Long Chen. At this moment, Long Chen was completely unaware that Qin Zide was approaching him with the 13th son of the ghost ruler. At this moment, he was drinking wine with the old man, but what made him smile bitterly was that there were more than 10 women beside him. These women were like fairies, constantly asking him questions. Some even directly asked Longchen for his clothes, as if everything about Longchen was so strange to them. Longchen waved his hand and took out many clothes from his storage ring, handing them to the people around him. He helplessly asked, "So, Senior and the clansmen have already lived here for 10 generations?" "That's right. I also learned from the records of the previous priests that our ancestors also came from the outside world," the old man murmured. "But according to what little friend said, the outside world is not as peaceful as here." Longchen nodded and sighed in his heart. For a moment, he even yearned for this place. The people here were very simple, isolated from the outside world, but happy and content. Perhaps one day, he would bring his parents and beloved women here to live in seclusion, but when would that day come? Perhaps after he killed a transcendent ruler. As long as this person didn't die, he would never be safe, because he had the body of a great emperor. After drinking wine, Longchen expressed his intentions. He didn't beat around the bush or use some tricks. However, to his surprise, the old man actually agreed to his request and was even puzzled by his request. In their eyes, what Longchen really wanted was a rock. But they didn't know that if this rock was placed in the outside world, it would be enough to cause a reign of terror. "Little child, you can stay here for a few more days. The rock you want is very hard, and it's in the middle of my clan's graveyard. Little friend, it's not convenient for you to enter." "I'm afraid it'll take a few more days," the old man said. Longchen nodded and didn't refuse. Longchen got up and walked out of the priest's house. His house was dozens of meters in size, which was very spacious in this town. Little brother, can you give that thing on your head to little Cherry?" As soon as Longchen walked out of the room, a little girl ran over and grabbed his clothes. The little girl's eyes were as clear and bright as the stars. Longchen couldn't help but smile. He waved his right hand and handed the hairband to the little girl, then picked her up and put her on his shoulder. He smiled and said, "You're called Little Cherry? How about Big Brother take you to catch some fish?" Longchen's faith was unprecedentedly relaxed. He soared into the air and soared into the sky with his 4 or 5-year-old daughter. The little girl covered her eyes in fear, but after a long time, she was so happy that she couldn't close her mouth. She hugged Longchen and giggled. Chapter 558. Don't take this item. Longchen was slightly startled by the sword spirit's words. He looked at the sacred mountain that everyone was talking about. The entire town actually existed behind the waterfall. This place was like a huge cave, and the sacred mountain in front of him should be the center of the mountain range where the waterfall hung. At this moment, Longchen was also enlightened by the divine sense. It was not that the people here did not want to cross the mountain and go to the outside world through the cave, but there was a bone-devouring stone on the mountain wall. Longchen had seen this stone in his previous life. Its grade was even higher than the green pattern source stone. However, this stone was very evil. It was like a spider's web. Just one strand of it was winding around the center of the mountain. Any fire that came close to it would instantly turn back into a pool of flesh and blood. The highest cultivation level of the people here was only at the spiritual martial realm. It was equivalent to an ordinary person facing such an evil stone. Naturally, they would treat the entire mountain as a sacred mountain. Don't take this item. Longchen pondered for a moment and said. The sword spirit looked at Longchen deeply. She did not say anything and did not intend to swallow the stone. Longchen landed and placed little Cherry on the ground. The people here were isolated from the outside world and their hearts were too simple. If the hall took the bone-devouring stone away, once someone left and exposed the location of this place, it would be a disaster. The stone here would become a crime of possessing a treasure. Longchen finally knew why this place had become a scorched land in his previous life. It was also the so-called scorched land mine. After thinking for a while, Longchen rose into the air again and began to set up a concealment array and countless killing arrays at the entrance of this place. Countless people below stared at Long Chen with hopeful faces. To them, he rose into the air and held the divine light in his hand. To them, he was like a god, however, they would never know how cruel it was outside the cave. Everything was built with blood and bones. In the blink of an eye, 7 or 8 days had passed. The entire mountain was covered with countless isolation arrays and killing arrays by Long Chen. Long Chen even left a divine sense imprint on it. Long Chen descended from the sky. Beneath his feet was the green rune source stone that the elder priest had brought for him. It was close to 50 kilograms in size. Long Chen looked at this scene and could not help but sigh. In his previous life, he had almost lost half his life to the 10th heavenly palace in order to obtain this stone. Now, he had obtained it so easily. Long Chen moved his right hand, and the sword spirit transformed into a whistling wind that devoured all of the green rune source stones. Long Chen knew that there was a green pattern source stone mine the size of a small mountain behind the village. It was formed by the accumulation of jade blood green pattern stones over a long period of time. Thank you, Senior. I will reseal this place with a spell formation. You must not come near. If there are any changes, I will rush over at the first moment. Long Chen bowed to the crowd and was about to leave. Everyone nodded. These days, they had also left a very good impression on Long Chen. Seeing that Long Chen was about to leave, Little Cherry cried out with an aggrieved expression, "Big brother, you have to visit me often in the future. Take me to fly in the sky." Long Chen smiled and agreed. Many men and women around them took out dried meat and wine for Long Chen to take away. Long Chen was about to refuse, but he was stopped by the elder priest. The elder priest said, "There is a stone cave behind us. There are many stone beasts inside. Men who go hunting always bring some dry food and wine when they go out. This time, you are going out, so this is also a token of our appreciation. Don't refuse." Long Chen only felt his heart was filled with warmth. The people here were hospitable and simple, but they had treated him so well in just 10 short days. Long Chen took the things, turned into a stream of light, passed through the spell formation, and stepped into the cave above the mountain. Seeing the sunlight again, in just 10 short days, Long Chen had a feeling that it was a lifetime ago. Perhaps this was a paradise in the human world. But he knew that he had to leave, and he had to leave quickly, because this place did not belong to him. He was afraid that if he stayed any longer, the hatred in his heart would be washed away by this calmness. Long Chen's eyes flashed with gentleness, and it was replaced by coldness. How many sword strikes are these cyan rune source stones worth? Long Chen flew up into the sky and turned towards the north. The sword spirit woman appeared again, but her tone was a little softer than Long Chen's. 1 sword strike. Long Chen nodded slightly. 1 sword strike was enough. The power of a holy weapon can only be used as a trump card, but it must not be abused. If he falls into it, he will eventually suffer the consequences. This truth has been engraved in Long Chen's heart in less than a decade in his previous life. What are you going to do in the north? The sword spirit woman looked deeply at Long Chen and asked in a deep voice. She already had some doubts in her heart. Long Chen seemed to know the existence of the 10th heaven like the back of his hand, which made her feel that Long Chen was mysterious and unfathomable. He was far from being as simple as he seemed on the surface. Long Chen showed a faint smile and said lightly, "There is a volcano thousands of miles in the north, which contains the essence of true fire and true fire immortal chi, which can help my cultivation to take a step further. It's just that this is the place where the 10th heaven trains, so it will take some effort to get it." The sword spirit woman frowned and said in a deep voice, "How do you know these things? If what you said is true, then these things have not been discovered yet, so you can get it. But why are you so sure?" Long Chen smiled but didn't say anything. He had no intention of answering her. Seeing Long Chen's reaction, the sword spirit woman snorted coldly and disappeared again without asking any more questions. Long Chen headed north in a straight line. However, less than a day later, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Long Chen's face was gloomy, because he clearly felt that the array mark he left on the mountain began to vibrate violently. Someone had gone to the village behind the waterfall and was bombarding the array. How could this be? According to the time I came here in my previous life, this place should not have been discovered so early. Besides, I have set up so many arrays, who can spy on it? Long Chen's face was ashen, but in the next moment, he flew back the way he came. He did not expect that the town would be attacked less than a day after he left. On the other side, the waterfall was cut in half, revealing the cave behind it. The entire cave was 100 meters in radius and spread over the mountain. Countless white flames lingered between heaven and earth, and the shadows of ghosts blotted out the sky. The ghosts turned into torrents and rushed into the cave like countless sharp swords. The entire cave was as bright as day at this moment. Several figures stood at the end of the cave. It was Yukingmo, Qin Zide, and the others. At this moment, their eyes were full of greed, staring at the countless ores in the sky through the array, as well as the cyan rune source stone in the distance. These were all priceless. To them, it was as if they had found a treasure trove. Yukingmo was covered in a black robe, and his voice was ghostly. I didn't expect that chasing Long Chen's aura would lead me to this place. This is a great fortune. Chapter 559. The cause of the scorched earth. Azure Demon, the 13th ranked son of the Dark Ghost Ruler. He was extremely ugly and had been banished by the Dark Ghost Ruler since he was a child. The Dark Ghost Ruler had experimented on his body, making him neither human nor ghost. However, in the entire 10th heaven, almost everyone knew the name of Azure Demon. Because he had the Bone Soul Stealing Staff, ranked 11th on the Divine Weapon list. Qin Zide and the others felt a chill in their hearts when they saw Azure Demon exuding countless evil auras and ghosts constantly passing through his body. Qin Zide didn't dare to raise his head and said in a trembling voice, "Young master is right. The minerals here will definitely make the palace master look at them in a new light, as well as the women here. I heard that the palace master likes women and likes to use them to refine ghosts. These women are all good." With a wave of his hand, the divine weapon in his hand turned into countless ghosts that bombarded the formation. If Long Chen were here at this moment, he would find that the scene outside the waterfall was exactly the same as the scorched earth mine he saw in his previous life. Whether it was his previous life or this life, Azure Demon might be the instigator of this place. Karma, fate, they had been elusive since ancient times. Bang bang. Violent sounds echoed throughout the space where the small town was located, and the entire mountain shook violently. The old priest and many young people walked out and looked at the people standing in front of the cave on the mountain. The old priest's voice was a little weak as he asked loudly, "Everyone, what are you doing?" Azure Demon's eyes hidden in the darkness were green. He only glanced at everyone but didn't answer. He raised the divine weapon in his hand again. The old priest and many men and women were swept by this pair of cold eyes and felt their bodies turn cold, as if their souls were about to leave their bodies. At this moment, even if they were simple-minded, they could see the contempt and greed in these people's eyes. Little Cherry's red face was full of fear. He was clearly frightened by the ghosts in the sky. He hugged the long leg of the woman beside him and couldn't help crying, "These people are not as good as Big Brother. Will Big Brother come to save us?" The old priest watched as the countless killing and sealing arrays began to crumble and said in a trembling voice, "He will return." Qin Zide looked at the spirit array in front of him that couldn't be broken even after attacking for a long time, and said in a low voice, "I see that the cultivation of the men and women below isn't deep. This kind of spirit array is definitely not something they can arrange. Since Long Chen's aura has been here before, then this spirit array was most likely arranged by him." As Qin Zide's voice faded, the Bone Soul Stealing Staff in Yukingmo's hand suddenly paused. Soon after, he let out a cold laugh and said, "It would have been fine if he had not come. However, if he had come, it would have saved me a lot of trouble. Although Lu Taishu's sword is suspended in the sky. But if I kill this person in less than 3 moves, he definitely won't be able to make it in time. At that time, I'll use the secret talisman to return to the heavenly palace. What can you do to me? Boom! Boom! While everyone was talking, the mountain range suddenly started to shake. Several of the matrix formations that Longchen had set up were broken in a short period of time. This person used a divine weapon to break the matrix formations. In addition, countless ghosts seemed to want to find the source of the matrix formations. The speed at which he broke the matrix formations was really unimaginably fast. However, even so, the matrix formations that Longchen had spent almost 10 days to set up were definitely not something that could be broken in a short period of time. Faster, faster. Time flew by quickly. Longchen's speed increased again and again. The scene of the scorched earth mine in his previous life, as well as the simple scene of Little Cherry and the others a few days ago, almost overlapped in his mind. He had no relations with these people, but he knew that no matter who was here today, he had to protect this place. Nearly 100 threads of immortal power coiled around Longchen's fingertips. Now, they started to break one by one, turning into spirit threads that disappeared between heaven and earth. As time passed, there were only a dozen or so threads left in the blink of an eye. When these last 10 threads broke, it was as if the matrix formations in the cave were all broken. Bang! 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 When Longchen could see the broken waterfall in the distance, the 10 threads in his hand all broke in an instant. Longchen's face was ashen. The sword in his right hand was not out of its sheath, but it suddenly flew out of his hand. He said coldly, "No matter who it is, stop them for me." Whoosh, the long sword turned into a light rainbow. In almost the blink of an eye, it rushed into the cave and disappeared in front of Longchen. In less than 10 breaths, Longchen had rushed to the front of the cave. When he saw the scorched earth and ghosts in all directions, he was shocked. This scene was exactly what he had seen in his previous life. In other words, the reason why this place had become a scorched earth mine in his previous life was because of the people who broke the matrix formations today. Although Longchen was shocked, he did not dare to delay. He rushed into the cave like a phantom, but when he entered the cave and saw the small town, his whole body could not help but tremble. Longchen's eyes were blood red. At this moment, there were close to 30 corpses in front of him. The original houses and streams were all burned by white flames. Countless ghosts rushed toward the crowd, and many of them were even raping women. The scene was so terrifying that it was nauseating. Little Cherry, the elder priest, and the others were protected by the holy weapon behind them. The hundreds of ghosts in front of them avoided them. Only one person was holding a long staff and constantly attacking the holy sword, erupting with thunderous sounds. "Stop! Kill them!" Longchen released his divine sense like never before, and it swept through the entire space like a mighty tsunami. Puff, puff, puff. The ghosts did not even have time to scream before they were crushed in an instant. Qin Zide and the others, as well as Yuqing Demon, turned to look at Longchen at the same time. "Brother, save us, save us. They're all demons." Little Cherry hugged the elder priest's staff tightly and cried out miserably. "Oh, you came at the right time. These people's minds are clear and will be great nourishment for ghosts. I was planning to keep 2/3 of them and send them back to the heavenly palace." Yuqing Demon turned to look at Longchen with the staff in his hand. "But it won't be too late to ravage them after we get rid of you." Longchen's figure moved, and in the next moment, he was standing between the crowd and Yuqing Demon, his right hand gripping his sword tightly. Longchen's eyes were bloodshot. He looked at the dozens of corpses on the ground and hissed, "Yuqing Demon, so it's you, the 13th son of the Ghost Overlord, a thing that is neither human nor ghost. Today, I'll let you taste the pain of having your soul refined." Longchen recognized Yuqing Demon the moment he saw the black robe. In his previous life, he had stolen the azure pattern source stone from the scorched earth mine and fought with Yuqing Demon dozens of times afterward. Chapter 560. Bloodline Battle. Hearing Longchen's words, Yu Azure Demon looked around with a sinister smile. His loose robe slowly fell back to his shoulders. Azure Demon held the staff in his right hand and revealed his true appearance. When the robe fell to his shoulders, countless terrified screams came from behind Longchen. The priest elder and everyone behind him stared at Yu Azure Demon in fear. The face under the black robe was ugly to the extreme. His eyes were like a dead fish's, his lips were almost gone, and his nose was sunken like a ravine. His face was full of flesh, as if he had been cut into pieces. Under his ugly face, his body exuded a strong aura of death. What was even more frightening was that there were countless ghosts moving around his body, parasitizing his flesh and blood. It was a chilling sight. Even Qin Zide and the others couldn't help but take a few steps back. They looked at Yu Azure Demon in fear. Yu Azure Demon didn't care about their gazes. He stared at Longchen and said in a low voice, "You've seen me before." Longchen sneered but didn't answer. The long sword in his hand created a sky full of sword shadows. His heart was filled with killing intent. Seeing Longchen's silence, Yu Azure Demon snorted and the staff in his hand expanded. With the movement of the bone soul stealing staff, it set off ghostly shadows that filled the sky. Ghosts wailed and howled as countless ghostly shadows overlapped. Under the ghosts, the staff was covered in white flames, like white bones writhing in the air. Everywhere it passed, the air exploded. The mountain shook. If not for the ore, this place would have been scorched and ruined. Rumble. The moment the two of them clashed, the entire space shook. The terrifying sound was deafening, like the collision of heavenly thunder. Qin Zide and the others retreated. One of them had a saint weapon, while the other was a divine weapon. If they used their power, they would be affected. Moreover, if Sword Sage Lu Taishu found out, they would have to bear the consequences. Qin Zide and the two behind him looked at each other, then silently retreated from the cave. Only the old man who was dressed like Yu Qingmo remained where he was, watching the battle between the two. Sacred weapon, it really is a sacred weapon. This sword has yet to display its might, but it is already able to go head-to-head with my soulbone staff. After a brief exchange of blows, the two separated once again. They both stood in the air and retreated 100 meters. Behind them, the mountain peak was covered with spiderweb-like cracks. This place was full of mines, the mountains extremely hard. To be able to create such a state was already extremely terrifying. Longchen glared at Yu Qingmo. But in his heart, he thought of the scene of him fighting with him in his previous life. After Longchen obtained the Azure Rune Source Stone, he was hunted down by the Azure Devil. He had almost fallen into a dangerous situation several times. There was even one time when he was almost refined into a ghost. The reason for this was because he had suffered greatly from the ancient soul-seizing staff in his hand. And then there was the Azure Demon's special physique, but now, Longchen had the confidence to kill Yu Qingmo within 10 moves. Because he now possessed the bloodline of the firmament. Longchen had no intention of leaving the cave. He did not want Sword Saint Six Taishu to interfere in this matter. He wanted to kill Yu Qingmo personally. Looking at the corpses on the ground, Longchen's heart was filled with anger. He had to vent it out. He said coldly to the Azure Demon, "Within 10 moves, I will take your soul. You will suffer the pain of having your soul refined." Hearing this, the Azure Demon could not help but throw his head back and laugh. The muscles on his ugly face twitched, but this laugh was uglier than crying. Countless ghosts jumped around his body as if they were mocking him. "Take my soul within 10 moves? Your sacred weapon may be unparalleled against others, but it is useless against me. Within 10 moves, not only will I take your soul, but I will also take away all the people living here. If I don't kill you, I will let you watch with your own eyes how I torture them." As the two finished speaking, a wave of murderous aura spread in all directions. Longchen waved his hand slightly, indicating that the people in the cave behind him should follow the lead of the elder priest and move into the mines behind the mountain. Qin Zide and the others stood outside the cave in front of the waterfall. "Ha, the young master is determined to get this weapon. We are really lucky this time. With this mine and the sacred weapon, our tribe will definitely be ranked in the middle 3 palaces. I didn't expect this person to really think that he is invincible with the sacred weapon. Otherwise, if he came out and attracted Lu Taishu's attention, things would be troublesome. I wonder what will happen when he sees that his sacred weapon is useless. Ha! After hearing Long Chen's words, Qin sighed, and the others could not help but laugh maniacally. He had brought Yu Qingmo with him even though he had a sacred weapon. Naturally, he already had a plan in mind. Long Chen had a sacred weapon. If one wanted to kill him without fear of the sacred weapon, perhaps only a sovereign or heavenly immortal could do so. Only the Zither demon. He was an exception. That was how Yu Qingmo had obtained the Bone Soul Stealing Staff. An Earth Immortal with a sacred weapon had been easily killed by Yu Qingmo, who was also an Earth Immortal. Now, Yu Qingmo had already stepped into the Earth Immortal stage, while Long Chen had only just entered the Virtual Immortal stage. Just as they were talking, Long Chen and Yu Qingmo exchanged blows again. Long Chen's sword streaked across the sky as he muttered, "Formless sword art, formless sword soul slash." An invisible aura instantly swept through the entire space within the cave, and countless ghosts were instantly dispersed. Yu Qingmo's eyes narrowed, and he actually felt a chill run down his spine. Although Long Chen was only at the Virtual Immortal stage, the power of the formless sword art was truly frightening. Yu Qingmo did not dare to be careless and immediately counterattacked. The soul-stealing staff in his hand spun around his body, drawing a complicated arc as he shouted, 10,000 souls, bone erosion. The moment the staff was thrown, it transformed into tens of thousands of demonic souls that pounced on Long Chen. The demonic souls blotted out the sky and blocked the light from the crystals above the cave. It was as if only the two of them were left in the entire space. At the same time, Yu Qingmo shouted, "Still not using the sacred sword? Let me see the power of the sacred sword that destroyed the Haoyu clan." Long Chen did not pay any attention to him. He merely stepped forward, and with every step, the aura around him began to change at a speed visible to the naked eye. The moment their attacks collided, the formless sword art seemed to have sunk into a swamp. Although it had killed countless ghosts, it had completely lost its power. However, Long Chen had transformed into a bloodline that blotted out the sky and covered the sun. The first technique of the Heavenly Dragon bloodline, Three-Eyed Thunder Dragon. The Three-Eyed Thunder Dragon might not be the strongest stage of the Heavenly Dragon bloodline, but it was the best at suppressing living souls and ghosts. In his previous life, he had fought with Yu Qingmo many times, and he had long known that Yu Qingmo was not a true human. This was also the reason why the ruler of Wraith had expelled him. Chapter 561. Golden Blood. Azure Demon rose into the air and stepped into the air. Countless ghosts and souls suddenly erupted from his body. His entire body began to swell at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even Long Chen couldn't help but frown at the sight of Azure Demon's appearance. At this moment, the Azure Demon was like a giant ghost. Its entire body emitted a nauseating aura, and its entire body was covered in a dark green liquid. Such a horrifying scene was not something that a human should be capable of. But Long Chen knew that his bloodline could never surpass the Heavenly Dragon bloodline. Roar! Long Chen's holy sword circled around him, and he could wield it with his divine will. At the same time, he pounced on Azure Demon. Azure Demon advanced instead of retreating. Countless strands of condensed immoral power surged from his bloodline, turning into a boundless ghost chi. The holy sword arrived in a flash, but it seemed to hit nothing and passed right through Azure Demon's body. Not only did it not cause any damage, but the scabbard was also entangled by ghosts. The holy sword shook, and the ghosts all dissipated. Azure Demon's eyes shone brightly at this sight, and he looked forward to the holy sword even more. Ordinary divine weapons would lose control under the corrosion of his bloodline's special ghost chi, but this holy sword was not affected at all. Whoosh! Azure Demon didn't seem to care about his battle with Long Chen. He observed the holy sword as he clashed with Long Chen's bloodline. However, when the two enormous bloodline bodies collided, his expression changed drastically. A charred smell filled the entire space, as if rain had fallen on a soldering iron. Countless ghosts shrieked in agony. Bang! Azure Demon's expression changed, and the bone soul stealing staff in his right hand ignited 100-meter-long white flame. He roared, "Bone fire cloud staff." Perfected immortal technique, ice sweeping sword technique. The two of them exchanged blows in a frenzy. Their huge bloodline bodies clashed madly, and their saint weapons and divine weapons clashed continuously. Outside the cave, Qin sighed, and the others felt their mouths go dry. The two's battle prowess was beyond their imagination. They couldn't believe that this was a battle between an earth immortal and a virtual immortal. Poochie, Poochie. In just a few hundred breaths, the two of them separated again. At this moment, the ground in the cave had long been cracked and pulverized, and the surrounding mines had collapsed for hundreds of meters. Just as Longchen had expected, the three-eyed thunder dragon physique and its bloodline ability were very effective in suppressing ghosts. The reason Azure Demon didn't fear weapons was because he was half human and half ghost. Between reality and illusion, he was innately in an invincible position. At this moment, the Azure Demon bloodline's main body had shrunk by a whole size. Lightning arcs danced around his body. Every time a lightning arc danced, a trace of pain flashed past his green eyes. Yuazurafin stared at Longchen and watched as his sacred sword soared into the sky. He had never imagined that a fellow who had just stepped into the virtual immortal realm would be able to fight him without using a sacred weapon. I originally wanted to offer the people here to Father, but now it seems that I have no choice but to kill them all in order to obtain the sacred sword. Yukingmo hissed. Longchen frowned, but his divine sense had already enveloped the entire space. Ghost domain devours the sky. As Yukingmo roared, his entire body started to tremble violently. His bloodline body started to expand again. Rumble. Then, it suddenly exploded. Numerous living souls turned into ghost heads. Their huge mouths were terrifying. Wherever they passed, the corpses on the ground instantly turned into white bones. Countless wisps of black smoke instantly filled the entire space. One after another, ghosts began to crawl out from the ground. Yukingmo seemed to have completely turned into a ghost. His entire body disappeared. Only the bone soul stealing staff continued to swing in the air. You can be considered the first person to make me use this move, however, this is all worth it. As long as I kill you and give the sacred sword to Father, he will definitely look at me in a different light. Yukingmo's voice came from all directions. At the same time, tens of thousands of ghosts roared and lunged at Longchen with their huge mouths. Longchen quickly retreated. The lightning around his body instantly gathered together and shot backward. It turned into a light screen that isolated all the ghosts and prevented them from coming into contact with the old priest and the others in the cave. A loud burning sound could be heard. Black smoke filled the air. Longchen was completely submerged in the thousands of ghosts. Outside the cave, Qin sighed, and the others saw this scene through the array formation. They knew that everything had come to an end. However, no one dared to take half a step into the cave. A virtual immortal from the ancient desolate land actually has the sacred sword and forced me to this extent, rumble. Before Yuazurafin could finish his words, rays of dazzling light shot out like the scorching sun after a storm. A figure slowly walked toward him. His body emitted endless divine light. His voice was like a bell as he said, "In my eyes, you are just a pitiful worm who loved the wrong father." As Longchen finished speaking, he held the sacred sword in his right hand. His body was already drenched in blood. However, his blood was like gold. Countless ghosts charged at him and instantly turned into wisps of green smoke. It was as if Longchen's blood was a burning flame. For a moment, all evil retreated. Tens of thousands of ghosts gathered in the opposite direction of Longchen. Then, they began to tremble. What's going on? Your bloodline. What kind of bloodline is this? Yukingmo's shocked voice came from all directions. Longchen's right hand moved in the air. He instantly grasped the sacred sword tightly. The cold light in his eyes seemed to solidify. The power of lightning gathered on the sword and turned into a lightning dragon. Formless sword art, fourth move, crackle. The thunderbolt streaked across the sky, but it was mixed with a vast might as it landed on a spot in the void. A violent explosion sounded. Yukingmo suddenly appeared among the countless ghosts. His body turned from illusory to corporeal. Between his chest and abdomen, his ghost-like body was forcefully shattered by the sword. Streaks of lightning crackled on it like blazing flames. You can actually kill me." Yukingmo's voice was filled with fear. He had turned into ghost energy. He was not afraid of the sacred sword. He had never thought that Long Chen's sword would hit him so accurately. Buzz. However, Long Chen did not seem to have any intention of explaining. His body flashed and disappeared. When he reappeared, his left hand was tightly clasped around Yukingmo's neck. The golden blood on Long Chen's arm kept dripping onto Yukingmo's body. It was like lava dripping onto ice. Black smoke rose into the air. Mournful screams could be heard. Chapter 562. Pass on a message. Long Chen grabbed Yu Azure Demon's neck with his right hand, but he felt a sinister aura land on him like a poisonous snake. Long Chen turned to look at the old man standing in the distance. Long Chen turned around, his eyes filled with coldness. He said coldly, "I remember that you're just an elder who follows Azure Demon. Yu Azure Demon isn't even a dog in front of the ruler of the Nether Ghost. If you wanted to save him, you would have done it earlier. Don't you think it's too late now?" The old man slowly walked towards Long Chen expressionlessly. His eyes didn't even land on Yu Azure Demon. Yu Azure Demon's face twisted when he heard Long Chen's words. "You're lying. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you." The old man and Long Chen turned a deaf ear to Yu Azure Demon's words. Although the ruler doesn't like him, he's still useful. Otherwise, I wouldn't have kept him by my side. That's why you can't kill him today. Also, for your own life, it's wiser for you to hand over the sacred sword in your hand. Everything in the 10 Directions Sky Prison should belong to the ruler of the Nether Ghost. Long Chen couldn't help but laugh as if he'd heard the funniest joke in the world. He stared at the old man. "Go back and tell your master that he's no longer in charge of the 10 Directions Sky Territory. Very soon, I'll go find him. There are many debts to be settled very soon." The old man's face darkened when he heard Long Chen's words. He couldn't help but laugh. A virtual immortal dares to challenge the ruler's authority? What a joke. You have the sacred sword today, so I can't do anything to you. However, you'll pay the price for what you've said today. As soon as he finished speaking, the old man looked deeply at Yu Azure Demon, then at Long Chen, and turned to leave. However, before he could move, his path was blocked by a flying sword. Long Chen's cold voice sounded, "Sir, aren't you leaving too quickly? I said that a remnant soul is enough for you to deliver the letter." That person hadn't made a move yet, but he was actually afraid of Long Chen's holy weapon. He had thought that the Azure Demon would be able to easily obtain many sacred weapons with its unique bloodline. However, no one had expected that Long Chen would be able to capture the Azure Demon with his virtual immortal cultivation level without even using a sacred weapon. If Long Chen did not possess a saint weapon, this person would have already attacked Long Chen. The old man stopped and his eyes narrowed into slits. He said coldly, "If you kill me, will you really start a war with the 10th Heavenly Palace? Are you really not afraid of my family's Dominator-level cultivation?" The threat in his words was self-evident. Unfortunately, just as he finished speaking, Long Chen had already unsheathed his sword. The old man had the battle prowess of a perfected Earth Immortal. If he went all out, it would not be easy for Long Chen to take him down with his current cultivation level. Using a sacred weapon was undoubtedly the safest choice. As expected, once the sacred weapon was unsheathed, the old man's expression changed drastically. His entire body's immortal chi surged as he frantically rushed outside. However, with the might of a sacred weapon, not to mention a perfected Earth Immortal, even a dozen Heaven Immortals would not be able to survive at such a close distance. Whoosh! The old man had only managed to escape a dozen meters before his body was shattered by the sword. His divine soul had just appeared and was about to escape. Go and capture the 3 people outside the cave. The old man's divine soul, which was just a few years old, disappeared in the next moment. Outside the cave, Zide and the others saw this scene through the array. They felt their entire bodies turn cold, and they had already rushed thousands of meters away. Unfortunately, how could he be faster than the sacred sword? The 3 people's bodies were instantly pierced, and then their bodies completely shattered. The 3 divine souls stood in place, trembling. They did not even have the thought of escaping. Restrain. With his divine perception, Longchen naturally knew that only their divine souls were left. With a low shout, the 3 divine souls and the old man's divine soul all rolled back at the same time. Their divine souls felt as if they were in the middle of the ocean, as if a giant hand was firmly grasping them. The old man's divine soul was trembling uncontrollably. His eyes widened as he stared fixedly at Longchen. "You, who exactly are you? Even my patriarch's divine soul is inferior to your divine soul." Zide and the others' divine souls landed beside the old man. When they heard his words, they became even more terrified and uneasy. They actually directly knelt on the ground. Longchen's left hand was still firmly grasping Yu Azure Demon, but his right hand was already holding the sacred weapon again. However, the sacred weapon had already returned to its scabbard at some point. "I ask, you answer. If you lie in the slightest, I'm afraid you won't be able to keep your divine soul," Longchen said indifferently to the old man's divine soul. At this moment, the old man was completely terrified by the strength of Longchen's divine soul. He knew that Longchen wasn't lying. If Longchen really allowed him to pass on a message, perhaps he would be lucky enough to keep his divine soul. First, did the Nether Ghost ruler send someone to the northern region of the ancient Desolation Land to capture a woman? Longchen's voice was incomparably low. Unknowingly, it was filled with biting cold killing intent. Longchen knew that the reason his mother had been captured by the people of the Heaven Realm was most likely because the Transcendence ruler wanted him to unleash his potential faster. However, the feeling of being manipulated by others in both his previous and current lives made him angry but unable to release it. The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. The old man stared fixedly at Longchen and said, "That is indeed the case. I don't know why my patriarch suddenly descended to the ancient Desolation Land and captured an ordinary woman. Second, is this person still alive? If she is, where is she?" The old man's divine soul trembled incessantly. He could clearly feel that Longchen's pressure on him had increased. It was as if Longchen could completely kill him with a single thought. The old man hurriedly said, "This person is definitely not dead. However, I don't know where she is. I really don't know. However, there is one person who should know. That is Yanqi Mountain." Just as Longchen's divine sense exerted pressure, the old man shouted himself hoarse. However, hearing this, Longchen couldn't help but let out a long sigh. As long as his mother was still alive, everything could be discussed. It seemed that the Transcendence ruler wanted to use the grace of saving his mother to directly take him in as a disciple. Longchen sneered. He slightly slapped the sacred sword in his hand. Instantly, 2/3 of the old man's divine soul was destroyed. Then, he coldly said, "Go and tell your patriarch that if my mother is dead, I will burn his divine soul for 1,000 years." The old man only felt his surroundings relax. He immediately ignored the damage to his divine soul and madly rushed outside. When Zide and the others heard Longchen's arrogant words, they broke out in cold sweat. However, they didn't know that Longchen's words were for the Nether Ghost ruler and the Transcendence ruler to hear. This way, his mother would be even safer. Chapter 563. Chapter 562 settled down as Longchen's voice fell. The Qin family members looked at his gaze and felt their bodies turn cold. Zide and the other 2 higher-ups of the Qin family knelt on the ground and kowtowed continuously, shouting, "As long as Sir spares our lives, we can pay any price." We have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai and offended you, sir. Please spare our lives. At this moment, the few of them no longer acted like the great clans of the heaven domain. They didn't even care about the dignity of the Earth celestial stage and the origin celestial stage. Longchen coldly snorted as he stared at them. Soon after, he ignored them and looked towards Yukingmo. Nether-Azure Demon's personality was so extreme that it was as if he had been cast from the same mold as the Netherghost ruler. However, the Netherghost ruler had never seen him as a son. In fact, Longchen later found out about Azure Demon's background. His life was nothing more than an accident when the Ghost Overlord was researching ghosts. Even after he was born, he was nothing more than a test subject for the Ghost Overlord. Otherwise, he wouldn't have turned into such a terrifying appearance. But it was hard to say whether Nether-Azure Demon was pitiful or detestable. For the sake of currying favor with Sovereign Netherghost, there was nothing he wouldn't do. The Dark Ghost ruler had countless women and ghosts under his command. It was a pity that Sovereign Nether Wraith didn't respond at all. A hateful person must have a pitiful side. However, at that moment, Longchen did not feel the slightest bit of pity. However, he did not want to kill him. This person might not be useless. Streams of immoral elemental energy flowed out of Longchen's left hand, causing Azure Demon's body to crumble. Azure Demon didn't seem to feel his body shattering at all. Even his aura didn't weaken in the slightest. If it wasn't for Longchen's powerful spiritual sense suppressing him, he would have been able to escape. Humph, Longchen snorted coldly. With a wave of his right hand, he tossed Longchen into the vermilion bird cauldron. Seeing Longchen directly throw Azure Demon into the cauldron to be burned, the Qin family members were shocked. Longchen didn't pay any attention to them. He turned around and rushed towards the old priest and the others who were hiding in the mine. Although Longchen had left, the 3 members of the Qin clan didn't dare to move their souls because they could clearly feel the pressure that came from all directions. Inside the mine, the old priest and the rest of the townspeople looked at Longchen with grief and gratitude. On the other hand, Longchen felt guilty when he looked at them. In his previous life, perhaps Azure Demon had unintentionally entered this place. But in this life, Azure Demon had come here because of him. The people who had died here made him feel extremely guilty. Longchen bowed deeply and said to the old man, "Today's matter, the responsibility is on me." As soon as Longchen finished speaking, the old priest hastily walked over to support him with both hands and said sorrowfully, "If you can enter this place, then there will definitely be others who can enter this place. If we didn't meet you, perhaps one day we would all die without knowing why. You can't be blamed for this. It's just that we don't understand. Are the people of the outside world really so bloodthirsty and terrifying?" Longchen shook his head but then nodded. He didn't know how to answer. These people had been cut off from the outside world for too long. The outside world was like purgatory to them. But they all knew that this place was no longer the paradise of the past. The mines here would eventually attract the attention of countless experts. "Little Big Brother, save us. Take us away." Little Cherry cried and hugged Longchen's calf. Longchen was silent for a while. Everyone was still trapped in the fear of Azure Demon and leaned on each other. "Okay, I'll take you away. I'm afraid there's only one person in this area who can protect you all. I just don't know if he's willing," Longchen said. Everyone's eyes instantly shone with hope. They clearly believed in Longchen without a doubt. If Longchen hadn't set up those formations and rushed back in time, they would have faced a nightmare. Everyone followed behind Longchen. They looked back 3 times with reluctance in their eyes. Only the elder priest said to Longchen, "Since we're leaving this place, we don't have anything to reward you. If you like, you can choose a few women from our clan to be your wives." When the elder priest said this, many women couldn't help but sneak a few glances at Longchen. Their faces were full of shyness. "In the mines here. Looking at those people, they must be very precious. I can see that you need them too. You just don't want to take them away." Longchen's heart skipped a beat, but he shook his head and said, "I already have 2 women in my heart. I can't let you down." As for the endless minds behind him, Longchen stared at them for a while and said, "I've never taken advantage of others in my life. Today's matter happened because of me. How can I take this mountain? Moreover, this mountain is where your clan's tombstones are. I'll take this place with me. What's yours will be yours in the end. I won't take." The elder priest still wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Longchen. With a wave of his hand, he controlled the holy sword and took out almost the entire core of the mine. This small mountain was the blue rune source stone. A small mountain, a town of people. After Longchen stepped out of the waterfall cave, he used a formation technique to attract Lu Taishu in the sky. Only Lu Taishu can give them a pure land in the 10th heaven. Longchen looked at Lu Taishu and said with a smile, "I see that you are lonely in the sky. Why don't you take these people back to Sword Mountain and give them a place to live? Our agreement will be null and void." What kind of person is Lu Taishu? He has lived for so many years and seen everything. Longchen knew that this was a bit difficult. Lu Taishu has never liked too many people. There has never been a fifth person living in the entire Sword Mountain. But this time, Longchen miscalculated. Lu Taishu agreed directly and said lightly, "These people can stay in Sword Mountain. As long as I'm alive, I can protect them. But if the person from the ancient desolate land you mentioned before can't take the title of Sword Saint, then they will leave Sword Mountain." Longchen couldn't help but laugh. He nodded and agreed. He knew that there were only two possibilities in Jian Shisan's life. One was death, and the other was climbing to the peak of Sword Dao. Everyone wanted to bid farewell to Longchen. Lu Taishu didn't know why Longchen was so confident, but he felt that his blood gradually began to boil. He took a deep look at Longchen, lifted the mine with his left hand, and carried everyone back to Sword Mountain with his right hand. The bone-devouring stone and the bone-soul-stealing staff, these two things are both evil and useless. It's a pity to abandon them. Longchen muttered to himself as he looked at the thread-like ore under his feet and Yu Qingmo's weapon. The sword spirit snorted coldly and appeared in front of Lu Taishu and said coldly, "That mine is at least enough for you to use 10 holy swords. Now there are only 2 things left, do you want to throw them away?" Chapter 564. Yanqi Mountain 10th Heavenly Palace. A huge palace that was as black as iron was suspended in the center of the entire 10th heaven. There were 4 towering figures guarding the palace. If one looked carefully, they would discover that they were actually 4 huge demon infants. As the demon infants breathed, a black aura condensed and finally gathered above the heavenly palace, then fell towards a courtyard built by white bones in the south. The courtyard of white bones was made of long bones, and the ground was covered with countless palm-sized skulls. It was unknown how many human skeletons were used to build this courtyard. Under the sunlight, the eerie white bone gave people a chill that made them shudder. In the courtyard, there was only a middle-aged man standing in the center. The middle-aged man was covered in a black robe, and his evil aura was somewhat similar to Yu Qing demons. However, this person's appearance was very different from Yu Qing demons. He was handsome but gave people a strange feeling. Especially those eyes, they were completely green, like 2 balls of burning will-o'-the-wisps. This person was the 10th Heaven's ruler, the ruler of the Nether Ghost, Yu Baigu. But at this moment, his face was full of awe as he looked at the void ripples in front of him. The moment the ripples dissipated, Baigu's face was gloomy, and his body exuded a terrifying aura. What is a transcendent ruler thinking? What is so special about this origin immortal? Not only did he ask me to capture his parents, but he even personally told me not to kill him. Let nature take its course. What do you mean by let nature take its course? If he walks in front of me, I will take his life. Continue to rise. I want to see what will happen to you in the end. The ruler of the Nether Ghost muttered to himself. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. Longchen had no idea what happened after the messenger arrived at the heavenly palace. At this moment, he was standing in the sky above the ancient Qin family with the divine souls of the 3 Qin family members. Countless powerhouses of the ancient Qin family stood in the sky. However, Long Chen's expression did not change. The saint weapon rotated around him as he said indifferently, "Have you thought about it? After the Bright Moon Ancient clan was divided, your clan should have obtained a lot of things. I only want saint-grade refining materials and 1,000-star immortal items. Oh right, have you heard of the name Yanqi Mountain? Although there were many experts from the Qin clan and the ancient clans, none of them dared to make a move as they stared at the sacred sword behind Long Chen. Everyone's expression was terrifyingly gloomy. They listened to Qin Zide's suggestion and asked Azure Demon to suppress Long Chen. But now, not only had Azure Demon been defeated, they had also suffered a great loss. The faces of the 5 upper echelons of the Qin clan were dark and gloomy. However, when they heard the words Yanqi Mountain, they couldn't help but raise their brows. Yanqi Mountain, north of the Dead Spirit Hall, the chief instructor of the Heavenly Palace's training grounds within a volcano. As soon as that person finished speaking, he said in a deep voice, "My clan will take all the things you mentioned, but you have to return the souls of these 3 people to my clan." Long Chen nodded his head. However, he was a little surprised at the location of Yanqi Mountain. The 10,000 miles volcano was the next stop that he had planned to go to. Qin Zide and the others were not worth mentioning to him at all. Moreover, their souls were now damaged. Even if they were reborn, they would have less than 10 years of lifespan left. Not long after, Long Chen obtained a large number of sacred-grade ores from the Qin clan. Although sacred-grade ores were very rare, their value was actually not high. In the 10th heaven, not to mention refining sacred weapons, no one could even refine a divine weapon. However, even for a large clan like the Qin clan, those 1,000 sacred-grade ores were like cutting off a piece of meat. Sacred-grade ores were different from sacred-grade materials. These ores were extremely beneficial to cultivators who had stepped into the origin immortal realm. These 1,000 ores were tantamount to cutting off a piece of meat from the Qin clan. Seeing Long Chen put away the sacred-grade ores and turn to leave, the faces of the Qin clan members were terrifyingly gloomy. Someone among them shouted, "The lives of those 3 are not worth these sacred-grade ores. Why did you save them? Are you blind?" The middle-aged leader snorted coldly, "If he uses the sacred sword, do you want our clan to become the next Bright Moon Ancient clan? Don't worry, since this person is going to Yanqi Mountain, someone will naturally take care of him for us." Long Chen went all the way north. His goal was the 10,000 miles volcano. There was true fire essence here, as well as true fire immortal yuan. Now, he even obtained Yanqi Mountain. And Yanqi Mountain most likely knew the whereabouts of his mother. These sacred-grade materials, plus the divine weapon, bone soul-stealing staff, and the true fire essence. After obtaining all these things, I will no longer look for sacred-grade materials. Long Chen said to the sword spirit. The sword spirit nodded. In fact, she didn't expect Long Chen to obtain so many sacred-grade materials in a short period of time. I won't appear again in a short period of time, and the divine weapon can no longer be used. These things are enough to upgrade the grade of this sword again. Without those 4 things, perhaps this sword can't become an immortal sword, but as long as you continue to devour sacred grade materials, there is a chance to reach the 9th grade sacred grade. After the sword spirit finished speaking, she didn't give Long Chen a chance to react and directly disappeared on the spot. Long Chen nodded slightly. If he could get a 9th grade sacred grade weapon, he would have more confidence in the final battle. But now, the most important task in his heart was to rescue his mother first. Although Long Chen knew that his mother would be fine in a short period of time, now that it was delayed, Long Chen felt more uneasy in his heart. A ray of light went north, the sun rose and set. The space gradually became a little hot and dry. It was obviously still early in the morning, but the sky seemed to be like the setting sun, bright red like fire. Thousands of miles of volcanoes, this was the training ground of the 10th Heavenly Palace. Long Chen didn't have the intention to directly look for Yanqi Mountain, nor did he have the idea of directly breaking into it. Although this was only the training ground of the 10th heavenly palace of the Death Spirit Hall, there must be many earth immortal or even heavenly immortal powerhouses inside. First, I have to find a way to enter and obtain true fire immortal yuan. In my previous life, when this place was discovered, it caused a big sensation in the 10th heaven, but everything was confiscated by the 10th heavenly palace. If there's enough true fire immortal yuan, even if I can't directly reach the earth immortal stage, I think my realm can be greatly improved. Longchen murmured to himself. After speaking, he was about to disguise himself and blend in. However, just as he turned sideways, his hand movement stopped. He saw a young man, holding a purple gold pen in his right hand and a golden page immortal book in his left hand, standing a few meters away from him, looking at him with a smile. After a brief surprise, Longchen couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. He stared at the young man and said lightly, "My price is not low, oh? You know who I am and what I am here for, how do you know that I will bid?" The young man seemed to be very interested in Longchen. Chapter 565. Record, Heavenly Dragon Vein Bloodline Green Cloud Ranking, Divine Weapon Ranking, Holy Weapon Ranking, Strange Flame Ranking, Rare Treasure Ranking. Everyone in the 10 Directions Celestial Domain knew about these rankings, but few knew who created them. In his previous life, Longchen had found out about this organization in order to find the Primal Chaos Golden Codex. The place where the rankings were created was called the Imperial Academy. Longchen had only met the people from the Imperial College once, but he could easily remember the people from the Imperial College. They were all youths, and they all held purple gold brushes and golden books. What left the deepest impression on Longchen was the cultivation base of these people. They were all ordinary people, and they did not even have a trace of spiritual power, let alone immortal power. However, they had movement techniques that even Longchen could not compare to. These movement techniques could allow them to fly, and they could even pass by the sovereigns. In his previous life, when Longchen died, there were almost 10 people who recorded this under the noses of the sovereigns. The youth stared at Longchen and seemed to be interested. He said, "You can call me Shusan. I'll trouble you for an hour, and the price will satisfy you." Longchen nodded, and his eyes flashed. "I want the method to obtain the spiritual wood of heaven, the soul of purgatory, the fire of 9 underworlds, and the soul of the starry sky." Longchen had just finished speaking when the foot of Book Mountain stopped. He shook his head and said, "Do you know what these 4 things represent? Even if I have the method to obtain them, do you have the life to obtain them?" As the two spoke, they rose into the air and landed on a cloud. Longchen said calmly, "You just have to say it, and I'll take it." "Can the Imperial Academy afford this price?" Shusan looked at Longchen deeply. He was very surprised that Longchen, a human essence celestial, even knew about the Imperial Academy. After a moment of silence, the purple gold brush in his hand moved slightly. He nodded and replied, "That depends on whether you're worth the price." Longchen smiled but didn't say anything. Instead, he leaped out, and his entire body shone brightly. The violet gold brush in Book Mountain's hand pointed in the air. Waves of ink rippled outwards, isolating the space where Longchen was. At such a close distance, not a single person within the 10,000-li volcano noticed the two of them. Longchen shook his body and transformed into his bloodline true form. A lightning dragon traversed through the sea of clouds. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled as he moved. He actually had the intention of stirring up wind and rain. The violet gold brush in Book Mountain's hand trembled uncontrollably. His eyes were filled with shock and excitement as his entire body trembled uncontrollably. He shouted thrice, "Good, good, good." As soon as he finished speaking, his purple gold brush landed on the golden page book in his left hand. For a moment, golden light shone brightly, and purple chi filled the air. As the brush moved, the sound of bells and drums rang out in unison and rushed into the sky. Longchen did not want to reveal the heavenly dragon vein, but he knew that he could hide it for a few more days in the ancient desolate land. Once he reached the heavenly region, unless he never used the power of his bloodline, the Imperial College would find him one day. The Imperial College was all-encompassing. Even the nine-winged golden crow, which had transcended the Dominator, was on the bloodline master list. This was enough to show how powerful the Imperial College was. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. Longchen sat in front of Book Mountain again and said in a low voice, "Is it worth the price?" "Yes, yes, yes." Book Mountain seemed to be in a trance. He stared blankly at the golden page book in his hand. Then, he shook his head and said helplessly, "The 4 items you mentioned, I know all of them, but I know how to obtain one of them. As for the other 3, I can only help you find the way. Whether you can obtain them or not depends on your luck." Longchen nodded. He naturally knew the importance of these 4 items. Being able to know one of them was already a stroke of luck. Longchen stared at Shu San and said, "If I'm not wrong, you originally planned to go to the ancient desolate land. After 10 days, can you bring some things down for me?" Shu San was in a good mood. Naturally, he agreed. After a short conversation, Shu San gave Longchen a jade slip and disappeared into the sky. He only said that he would look for him after 10 days. Longchen looked at the place where Shu San disappeared and shook his head with a smile. In his previous life, he was probably the same person who searched the 10 heavens all the way to the ancient desolate land to investigate the traces of the heavenly dragon vein. However, he didn't find anything in his previous life. In this life, he had already recorded it in the 10 heavens. For Shu San, this might be a pie that fell from the sky. After Shu San left, rows of purple and golden words appeared in the sky of all heavens, including the 10th heaven, announcing to the people of the heaven realm that the heaven realm has been destroyed. The heavenly dragon vein, ranked first on the bloodline master list, has appeared. It has the heavenly Dharma body, which can walk on behalf of the heavens. It has the blood of a god, which is like an ancient god. It has streaks of golden light shook the entire 10 directions heaven domain. The heavenly dragon vein, this legendary bloodline actually existed in this world. In the first heaven, in the heavenly palace, an old man with a sage-like demeanor was sitting on a bodhi. Behind him, the golden crow spread its wings, and 9 divine lights covered the sky. His eyes were full of fierce light. "Heavenly dragon vein, this is the will of the heavens helping me. This person must be the person I'm looking for. After so many years, my mission is finally completed." On the other side, Longchen looked at the detailed explanation of the heavenly dragon vein on the bloodline master list in a daze and shook his head with a wry smile. "Now, I'm afraid that people will soon know that his bloodline is the heavenly dragon vein. After all, he has used his bloodline before. However, this can't be hidden." Longchen put away the jade slip given to him by Shu San, and made a decision in his heart. This jade slip contains the method to find one of the 4 materials. Of course, there are also some secrets about the other 3 materials. This information can only be obtained by the Imperial Palace. Longchen shook his head. Even so, with his current cultivation of the virtual immortal realm, going to look for it is completely courting death. Now, improving his cultivation to save his mother is the most important thing. Thinking of this, Longchen's flesh and blood began to swell under the cover of his divine sense. His height suddenly became shorter, and his cheeks gradually sunk, then he gradually walked into the 10,000 miles volcano. The 10,000 miles volcano was the training ground of the 10th Heavenly Palace's Death Spirit Hall, and Yen Qi Shan was the chief instructor of this training ground. "Stop!" As soon as Longchen entered, he was stopped by a patrol team. Longchen was about to speak, but he didn't expect that several people strode over without the slightest intention of explaining to him. Longchen frowned and was puzzled in his heart. However, he heard several people sneering and saying, "Those who came to join the army in the past few days are really lucky. My 10,000 miles volcano suddenly erupted a few days ago, and there seems to be a gap in it. You must mine it within 3 days." Longchen was stunned. Things were so coincidental, but this was not a good thing for him. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.